IB Nation, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. That's Trevor. I'm Bryan, and we are ready to talk some Notre Dame football, sort of. Today is one of my favorite shows of the offseason. It really is. I love doing this, and we honestly do this more for my enjoyment than anyone else's. We always try to do things that we think you guys are going to enjoy, and I think you guys are going to enjoy this, but I personally love talking about the all-opponent teams, and so we're going to do that today. We're going to break down the all-opponent teams for Notre Dame's opponents for offense, defense. And then as part of that, after we break down the all-opponent teams, we will then talk about what Notre Dame players would be on the list if we included Notre Dame as that 13th team. Have some fun with that. We'll go offense. We'll go defense. And then also today we are kicking off our season preview series where we will kind of break down and preview the opponents that Notre Dame is going to face in order. So today we're going to start with Miami. We're going to preview Miami. This is not meant to be a preview of the matchup per se, but more so an attempt to let you not teach you all, but like just open up the conversation and for those who aren't aware of the opponents to continue to, teach you more about it and go over it. So every opponent it's going to come across as more of a favorable type of preview. And last year, there was a lot of people that would be like, well, you guys must think this team's really good. I'm like, I think you're kind of misunderstanding what we're trying to do here. This isn't a matchup preview. This is simply trying to talk about the opponent, discuss the strengths, weaknesses, things like that, expectations of the opponent. And we're going to have that conversation today. And we're going to go in order. So we'll talk Miami this week. We'll talk Texas A&M next week. And then just go in order, Purdue, Arkansas, Boise, and in that order, all the way down to Stanford at the end of the year. So it's going to be a lot of fun. And then once we finally wrap that up, that's when we'll do our season predictions preview show, just to give you guys a little bit of a timeline on how that's going to go. So that's what today's show is. And Trev, I think this is a fun show because it gives fans a sense of, obviously knowledge of the players that Notre Dame is going to be facing this year. But then also, as you go through this, one of the things that we're going to talk about as part of it is like, boy, this is a really strong position group. And we'll primarily focus on the first team, but we'll mention second team guys. We'll talk about some sleepers. But with this, some of it was hard to come up with who was on first team because, boy, these guys are really good. And how do I leave this guy off the first team? And sometimes it was like, I can't believe I have to put this guy on the first team because it's just not a strong position group. And that's what makes it really fun to kind of study the team and look at the team and prepare for the season because it's like you may say, hey, this is a position group that's not as strong for Notre Dame, and it's even more concerning that it's not as strong and they face really good players. Or, yeah, this may not be a strength for Notre Dame, but I don't know that we're going to be able to see that in its full entirety during the regular season because the opponents aren't really strong there. And it's good to know those type of things because you go in the postseason and you start facing teams that are good in those areas and you're like, they're going to have to find some answers for this. So it's going to be a lot of fun today, Trev. This is your first time doing an all-opponent team, so I'm very much looking forward to it and having some conversations about the best players Notre Dame's going to face this year.
I'm excited that this is the conversation we're having today. I think it's going to provide it's going to shed some light on some of the things that we've touched on over the course of the offseason so far. I'm pumped to start diving into the opponent previews. Obviously, this is more of a hot topic team for me than it might be for some others, but it starts to paint some of the picture of where people can start to get some of these opinions. Because a lot of times throughout the offseason, a lot of people just kind of remember logo on the helmet, the success they had last season, where does it leave you now? So I'm excited to talk about everything today, man. I'm ready to jump into it. We got a lot to cover.
So we will start off on the offensive side of the ball, Trev, and talk about – we're going to go sort of by position group. So we'll go quarterback. We have one quarterback, one running back, 3 receivers, 1 tight end, 2 tackles, 2 guards, and a center. I'm not a huge fan of doing just 5 linemen. I kind of like to try to have some type of actual positional – aspects to it. If we were ever going to do a where it's just the 5 best linemen and not tackles, guards, and centers, this would have been the year. And we'll explain that when we get to the O-line section. But that's going to be the order we break it down. We'll talk about the guys we both have on first team. There's some we have the same, some we don't. There's a couple where I don't have a guy on first or second team that Trevor has on first and vice versa. So we're going to have some fun with that. It's going to be a really interesting breakdown. And we're going to start off at quarterback, Trevor, because the big picture thing is my first team guy is not on either of your first two teams. Your first team guy is not on my first or second team. We both picked the same sleeper. And there's two ways to look at that. One is we have a very different opinion of who the best quarterbacks are. But the other way to look at it is, and I think this is actually more accurate, is this actually there's a lot of good quarterbacks on the schedule this year that you could argue for multiple guys being the first team quarterback. And you can make a case for a guy that we both have second team being the first team quarterback. And I would be willing to say that I don't know that the guy that we both picked preseason is going to be the guy at the end of the season, and we're going to have some fun with that. But let's first start off at quarterback, Trev, and I went with Blake Horvath. And I know this is going to be something that some people look at and say, how could you have a Navy quarterback on there? But I have a couple of responses to that. Number one is he's the most dynamic player that Notre Dame is going to face. And he's, in my opinion, the toughest matchup that Notre Dame is going to face. I love the production. If you look at the production he had last season, he passed for 1,353 yards. He rushed for 1,246 yards. He averaged 7.1 yards per rush, 9.7 yards per pass attempt, and had 30 touchdowns and 4 interceptions. And so there's some quarterbacks on the list that people say, well, this guy passed for more yards than this guy had total yards. I'm like, yeah, but this guy had more touchdowns than any other quarterback they're going to face this year. And when you look at combined touchdowns. So when I look at Blake Horvath, I also look at a guy that led his team to much greater success than they had the previous season. The other thing that kind of opened my eyes up about Blake Horvath is because sometimes with Navy quarterbacks, you can just it's a system guy. The results are due to the system. But when you look at how much Navy struggled offensively during that about a month period where he was banged up and injured, and you're like, okay, so his injury happened during the Charlotte game. First 5 games of the year, Navy scored 49, 38, 56, 41 points, and then they scored 51 in that game against Charlotte. They had 437, 409, 566, 452, 463 yards. They went for 288 against Charlotte. And if you watch that game, they had a lot of short fields. That partly factored into that. And then came the Notre Dame game. And we remember talking about that before the game, how Blake Horvath deals with the hand injury. And you saw Navy the rest of the way until he got better. 14 points, 10 points, 28 points, 0 points, 34 points, 31 points, 21 points against Oklahoma. Well, the thing that changed during that period of time is, he was out, started to get a little bit healthier. He was very banged up. He tried to battle through, played against Rice, was ineffective, played against South Florida, was ineffective, got hurt again against Tulane after one pass, missed the rest of that game, missed the East Carolina game, finally came back for Army a little bit more healthy, and he was outstanding against Army. And in the last 2 games, he rushed for 351 yards in the last 4 touchdowns in the last 2 games against Army and against Oklahoma, and also completed 11 of 21 passes in those games. So I look at the production is there, the fact that the team was so. Oh, and by the way, their record, all 3 losses were in the time frame in which he was dealing with the hand injury. They were unbeaten outside of that, including a very good win over Memphis, a very good Memphis team. They had a win over a 12-win Army team, and they had a win over Oklahoma in the bowl game. And I think you take him off that team, there's no way they're as good as they were. And so that's where I look at Blake Horvath and the dynamic playmaking ability, the production, and the fact that he put that team on his shoulders and said, hey, we're going to do something here this year. And when he was healthy, they were pretty dynamic. So that's why I have Blake Horvath as my first-team quarterback. Trev, who is your first-team quarterback?
So I love all the points that you brought up, and along those similar lines, that's why I have my quarterback, the first-team quarterback.
About the type of team they were when he was healthy?
Versus not. And that's Eli Holstein at Pitt. Now, I know might be a hot topic. I've seen some people in the chat talk about Jade Maeva. That's a player that didn't make mine or Brian's list.
I barely considered him, to be honest with you.
Same.
Because if you only saw him play against Notre Dame, you have a very different opinion of him than if you saw him play against everybody else they played last year.
Yes. But my first-team all-opponent quarterback is Eli Holstein. Let me explain. He had one of the better starts to the season for a young quarterback nobody talked about. He had 3 passing touchdowns in 5 consecutive games to start the year. First-time starter, first 5 games, he had 15 touchdown passes, 3 interceptions. mobility wise, he reminds me of like a CJ Carr. He's not a runner. They're not going to design runs for him, but he is athletic enough to where he can make plays and escape the pocket if he has to. Last season, he had 81 carries for 328 yards, 3 touchdowns. But in a similar light to Blake Horvath, the Panthers started out last season 7-0. Once Eli Holstein got hurt and wasn't himself from earlier in the season, they lost 6 straight games and wasn't even competitive games. Like, you go back through and you look at their schedule. First couple games, they're dropping 55, 28, 38, 73 against Youngstown State, but it's 73 points. They had 34 on the road against North Carolina. They had a close home win against Cal. They dropped 41 in a big win over Syracuse. And then once he got hurt and wasn't fully healthy, they scored 25, 19, 29, and then 23. And so I look at this offense, and for some of the good supporting roles that they have, we're going to talk about a Pitt running back later. But I like what Eli Holstein brings to the table. He's a big-bodied kid. He's 6'4". He's 225. He's still young. For him, it's a big question of if he can stay healthy. And there's arguments to be made for a handful of quarterbacks to be on this list. But for me, when I go back through and look what he meant for his team, he has a year of progression to step up with. One of the things that kind of made me differ from not putting Blake Horvath on this list is that I think that we may have seen the best of what Blake Horvath can be for Navy. I don't think we've seen the best of what Eli Holstein can be for Pitt. Now, with that being said,
so what you're saying is you're making a projection. It's
yes.
based on that's fair.
Yep. And so and now this projection could be wrong at the end of the season, barring health, barring what his supporting cast looks like at Pitt. But to start off, I went with Eli Holstein as my first team all-opponent quarterback.
My second team all-opponent quarterback is Carson Beck. Carson Beck is a guy that I considered putting first team and a guy that I considered putting not on there at all. And that really comes down to the challenge of evaluating Miami, which we'll get into later, because you don't really know what you're going to get in Carson Beck. And the Carson Beck that we saw in 2023 looked a lot different than the Carson Beck that we saw in 2024 at Georgia. Mm-hmm. In 2023 at Georgia, Carson Beck passed for 3,941 yards, averaged 9.5 yards per attempt, completed over 72% of his passes, and had a quarterback rating of 167.92. He was not a big touchdown guy. He only had 24 touchdowns. That was just kind of the nature of the offense. And had only 6 interceptions, performed very well in some of their bigger games. Last year, however, even before the injury, you saw Carson Beck start to struggle last season. Had a completion percentage at 64.7, so that's about an 8% drop-off. Passed for 3,485 yards. The yards probably would have been a lot closer had he not got injured against Georgia or Texas, and he only had 56 yards in that game, and then didn't play against Notre Dame. So if he was averaging about let's see here what his average was. So he was at 3,485, and if you take away the 56 from the Texas game, divide that by 12, he was around 285.7 yards per game. So if he plays 14 games, he's at 4,000 yards, which is the number of games he played the year before. So the yards were about the same. The difference is what it took to get to those yards. And in 14 games to get to 3,900 yards in 2023, he threw 417 passes. Last year, to only get to 3,485 yards, he threw 448 passes. He went from 9.5 yards per attempt to 7.8 yards per attempt, which is a very big drop-off. Like, you're dropping almost 2 whole yards per attempt. That is a far less efficient team. Touchdowns went up 4, 24 to 28, but the interceptions doubled. They went from 6 to 12. And then the rushing production was also not there. He rushed for 116 yards and 4 touchdowns. So just chain mover, some goal line stuff, some keep stuff. 116 rushing yards and 4 touchdowns to 71 rushing yards and 1 touchdown. So across the board, outside of just yards per game, his production took a big drop last year. Some issues I had with Carson Beck were I didn't think he was very good in big games, which he was better in those moments in 2023. And just like you look at the Bama game, was great in the comeback, couldn't make the throws at the end to win it, but he was part of the reason with some of his turnovers early that they were even behind. And you saw him struggle in some of those against some of those better teams that they played last season. So I look at Carson Beck and see a guy that could potentially be the best quarterback that Notre Dame faces this year. Reason he's not on there is the inconsistency, the question marks about receiver that Miami has, and we'll get into that later. But then also, I don't know where he's going to be health-wise. That's really what it boils down to. And that's why I had a hard time putting him number one. Missed all spring with an elbow injury. I don't know where he's going to be velocity-wise, timing-wise. He's missed a lot of time with receivers, and we saw how that impacted Riley Leonard last year. And so that's part of it too, is I've seen what missing an entire offseason at a new team can do to a quarterback as a passer. What Carson Beck doesn't have is the ability that Riley Leonard had to go out there and make plays with his legs if the throwing wasn't there. So that's why I have Carson Beck second team, and honestly thought about not even having him on the second team.
Yeah, reality of the situation is outside of, I believe, one quarterback at Boise State, all 11 other quarterbacks that Notre Dame will play in 2025 have not started a complete season, whether it be due to injury or stepping into the lineup late. There's a lot of heavy-hitting names. Marcel Reed, Carson Beck, guys like that. I do have a question for you, Brian. Where were you at with Maddox Madsen on this list?
Never considered him. Just
Okay.
looked at him, but I had CJ Bailey ahead of him. I would have taken Jade Maeva ahead of him. I think Maddox Madsen's a nice G5 quarterback that benefited from having the most dynamic running back in the country around him last year.
Fair.
Now, he has some good weapons to work with this year. And Boise has a player on my first team or on my second team skill position, and then a guy on my first team O-line. But he's just kind of a product of, he's a nice, good G5 quarterback. If we're doing like an all group of 5 team, he'd be on there. As far as like an option, a guy that I would consider.
Sure.
But he wasn't someone that I looked at. I said CJ Bailey, somebody that I looked at and thought about. And with CJ Bailey was a lot like you were talking about with Eli Holstein. It would have been all about projection. He was both of our sleeper quarterbacks.
Mm-hmm.
But when I watched CJ Bailey last year, I believe as a true freshman, and he threw for 2,400 yards, 17 touchdowns, 10 picks, rushed for 275 yards, 5 touchdowns. But he was a playmaker at times. And I thought finished the season really well against North Carolina and East Carolina. Had some really good moments against Syracuse, but he also had some freshman moments like you saw against Georgia Tech. But I actually thought very hard about putting CJ Bailey as my first or second team quarterback. I would have considered him before I would have considered. Yeah.
Okay, good deal. Yeah, you and I see the Carson Beck situation the same. That's what held him out of my first team. Where I had a hard time was honestly keeping him on my second team because of the Blake Horvath thought.
Mm-hmm.
But I went with Carson Beck on my second team. He is, in my mind, he's the sole reason that offense is still maintaining that level of hype. There's some people that are out there that still believe that Miami's offense is going to be what it was last year. We'll dive more into that later. But Carson Beck holds a big piece of that. And so that on top of his experience, because his production took a dip, but the experience that he does have, I do put into heavy consideration there. So, yeah, I have him as my second team.
Eli Holstein was him and CJ Bailey were my next two that I was considering for third team. And that's one thing to look at is the quarterback play that Notre Dame faces this year is much stronger than it was last year.
Yeah, for sure.
Much stronger than it was last year. So I think that factors into a little bit about what I think will be a challenge for Notre Dame's football team this year, Notre Dame's defense this year, is that I do think quarterback play is going to be better. Now, there's a lot of unproven aspects of it, but there's a lot of talent. Like I said, CJ Bailey, Blake Horvath, Carson Beck, Eli Holstein, Marcel Reed, the Ryan Brown kid that's going to start at Purdue is not a bad football player. Taylor Green from Arkansas is a dynamic, run throw guy. And then another potential sleeper pick for me is if Dylan Lonergan can win the job at Boston College, that's another guy to keep an eye on. So the other one, obviously, who wins the quarterback job at Syracuse? That guy's going to put up numbers. But does that mean that they're the best quarterback? We're going to find that out. And we'll have a lot to say about Syracuse when we get to Syracuse preview because The supporting cast to me is not going to be nearly as strong this year as it was for Kyle McCord last year. So that's something to keep an eye on. But Blake Horvath's my number one. Eli Holstein's your number one. Both had Carson Beck number two, and then C.J. Bailey is that fourth guy. I like that one. Let's go running back, because this is another position that I think is going to be a strength of Notre Dame's opponents. There were a lot of running backs to consider, and there were some guys that you could look at and say, hey, I might have considered that guy and added him to my potential list if it wasn't for the fact that all the other guys on the board were still too good. And so that was an interesting one. That was a little bit of a challenge. I'm going with a little bit of projection on this one. And my first team running back is Le'Veon Moss from Texas A&M. You look at last year's numbers, they're not going to blow you away. He ran for over 700 yards and had, I think I'm pulling up his numbers now, he had 765 yards, 10 touchdowns, 121 carries, 6.3 yards per carry. Only played 9 games. And if you look at his production from last season, and in the 9th game that he played, he carried the ball twice for 8 yards. So if you actually look at his per game production and put that over the course of a 13-game season, you're talking about a guy, Trev, that would have rushed for over – actually, that's not correct. I did 765 or 757 times 12. I meant to divide that by 8 first to get a proper number. But if he'd have played a 12 regular season plus a 13th bowl game, you're talking about a guy that's going to rush for over 1,200 yards, averaging over 6 yards a carry. You're talking about a guy that rushed for basically 10 touchdowns in 8 games. You know, the type of production he would have had there. You're talking about a guy that's over 1,200 yards, over 16 touchdowns in a season. That's very good production. So not a huge threat in the pass game, only caught 10 balls for 141 yards, no touchdowns. But he's a very good run. I mean, and he's the guy when A&M started kind of leaning on Notre Dame in the third and fourth quarter, he was the back that was doing a lot of that damage. Now, so a lot of guys you could have gone with. I went Desmond Reed with my second team back. He is without a doubt the best all-around back on the schedule, and it's not even close. I went with Le'Veon Moss because I think he's just a more pure runner. But Desmond Reed's a not only an impact runner, he rushed for just under 1,000 yards last season for Pitt in a team that threw the ball a lot. But he had 966 rushing yards, 5.3 yards per carry, 5 touchdowns. Not dynamic numbers, but then you look at him, he had 52 catches for 579 yards. He had a punt return for a touchdown last season. He's a dynamic all-around weapon. I don't think he's a pure every down running back, but I'll put it to you like this. If Notre Dame had to face a team with Le'Veon Moss as your number one and Desmond Reed as your rotation back, that is not a fun day for your defense. Not a fun day for your defense. Some other guys that I considered, I think Mark Fletcher from Miami is a guy that I could see sort of stepping into that role that Damian Martinez had. He's a 6'2", 220-plus pound running back, solid speed, more of a slasher than a guy that's going to make a lot of people miss. Jordan Lyle's a nice compliment to him. Those guys both were kind of on my list at running back. NC State had a freshman last year that I liked a lot named they call him Hollywood Smothers. His name is Dalen. He's a really good running back. He was another guy that I considered in this list as well. But there's a lot of backs. The kid that's replacing Ashton, I'm completely Ashton
Genty.
Ashton Genty. I was kept saying with Gillette. I don't know why I was going there. I was like, am I having a stroke right now? But Ashton Genty's an outstanding running back. USC's got a couple transfers that are going to be interesting to see. Boston College has a running back that's coming back named Turbo. They got some great names that Notre Dame faces this year at running back. NC State's got a kid named Hollywood Smothers, and Boston College has a running back named Turbo Richard coming back next year. They also have Jordan McDonald. So there's a lot of quality running backs on the schedule this year, Trev, that Notre Dame's going to have to face. And I didn't even mention like Alex Tezka, who comes back. I like the 2 kids at Stanford. I didn't consider them, Chris Davis, and I'm drawing a blank on the other kid's name from Stanford right now, who actually Micah Ford, because their offensive line is going to be so bad. Mm-hmm. That's what kept them off my consideration list. But looking at all those backs, a lot of good backs on the board this year, Trev, that Notre Dame's going to have to face. But I think it was an easy decision for me to have Le'Veon Moss number 1 and Desmond Reed number 2.
Yeah, you and I see that the same. It was a very easy choice for my first. When you texted me that over last night, I immediately threw it into my notes. Lauren and I were watching a movie, and I put in my notes like RB1 was Le'Veon Moss. And a couple weeks ago, I went through and I put in like Notre Dame opponent position groups and like their returning production, and nobody really sniffed Le'Veon Moss's production. Mark Fletcher did from a season ago. Honestly, Amari Daniels did, who also plays for Texas A&M, and then the only other one that kind of comes close, some of the Navy kids, and then the Wayman James kid who played at Hutchinson Community College. He transferred into USC. There, he had 1,600 yards, 20 touchdowns. But again, that was at the JUCO level, I believe. And so when I was looking at this list, Le'Veon Moss became the easy one, especially when you factor in what his production would have been after injury. I did float around the idea of putting Amari Daniels on like my third team or sleeper team, but I really like Mark Fletcher, but it was tough to keep Amari Daniels off there, I will say.
Yeah. The Notre Dame defense is going to face 2 good backfields and 2 good lines the first 2 weeks of the season. There's no question about that. Overall, Trev, agree. This is a strong position for Notre Dame that they're going to have to face some. I think quarterback and running back this year is much stronger week to week than what Notre Dame's defense faced last year.
Yes, quarterback definitely. Running back, I think it's a little bit more even because they faced some pretty good backfields last year too. But yeah, I'll say this about this year's running backs that they face.
The week. What I'm referring to is it's the week after week after week after week. Like last year, like Northern Illinois, Arterio Brown, stud. Louisville had a really good running back room. Jamal Haynes would probably be my first team running back this year. But then there's Miami of Ohio didn't have much of a running back situation. Stanford's running back situation wasn't great because of the line. You know, you just had a lot of other times where it wasn't great. Woody Marks is a very good back. To me, it's almost like every team they play each week has a good running back.
Yeah.
And that's what I think is a different challenge for Notre Dame this season.
Agreed. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm with you.
Receiver, polar opposite from what we just talked about with the first 2 positions.
Yeah.
Completely different.
Yeah.
I struggled to come up with 3 first-team guys. It was not easy. There were 2 guys that were easy first-team picks for me, partly because of just the lack of impact production across the board. There aren't a lot of, in my opinion, just really impact receivers. But my first 2, and we have these 2 in common, is I have Casey Concepcion, who would have faced Notre Dame either way. If he stayed at his previous school, he would have faced him when they played NC State. He transferred to Texas A&M. He's coming off of a very down year, 53 catches, 460 yards, only 8.7 per catch, 6 touchdowns. The year before as a freshman, however, much better production. 71 catches, 839 yards, 11.8 per catch, 10 touchdowns. It's kind of like the argument I've used for Will Pauling. It's like I'm not punishing Will Pauling for a down year last year as much. He was injured, bad quarterback situation. I view him more as the guy we saw 2 years ago. Same thing with Kevin Concepcion. I think he struggled with some of the quarterback issues that they had last year. I think when C.J. Bailey came along, there were other guys that he liked better. They've got a very good tight end we'll be talking about here in a little bit. They had a pretty good all-around receiving corps, some guys that were better downfield throwers. So his production last year is a little bit misleading. I think he gets too much hype nationally as like a top 10 national receiver. He's still a good football player. And he's certainly one of the 2 best receivers that I have on the board. And then, of course, and probably my top receiver on the board is Makai Lemon. And it's not just because of what he did to Notre Dame. His numbers won't blow you away. 52 catches, 764 yards, 3 touchdowns. This is an offense that spread the ball around a lot last year. So there was nobody that had just dominant numbers across the board for USC last year. But I thought Makai Lemon was their most impressive looking receiver. There were other guys that had more catches. Obviously, they've got a guy coming back, Jacoby Lane, who had more touchdowns. Actually, nobody had more catches in yards than Makai Lemon, but more touchdowns. There were some guys who had bigger moments in certain games. But I also look at Makai Lemon as he had 2 games where he didn't catch a ball because of injury. And later in the year, if you look at his numbers like the first 5 games, he caught 7 passes. for, let's see, 45, 82 yards. First 5 games, 7 catches for 85 yards. All his production, and he finished the year with 52 catches for 764 yards and 3 touchdowns. All of that came in the last 8 games of the season. He had several good performances. He had 6 catches for 73 yards against Penn State, 4 for 134 against Rutgers, 8 for 70 in the touchdown against Washington, 2 for 69 against UCLA, 9 for 133 against Notre Dame. He was giving Notre Dame slot receivers work. That was by far the least productive game Jordan Clark had all year. He was torching Jordan Clark and Christian Gray in that game. And then he had 6 catches for 99 yards against Texas A&M in the bowl game. So I think that production we saw from Mekhi Lemon translates to this season, and he becomes more of the number one for them. Like, I think their first 2 guys are going to be a lot more productive individually than they were last year because there's not as much other targets to spread the ball around to because there's no Deuce Robinson, there's no Kyron Hudson, there's no Zachariah Branch. The running backs are still going to get their touches, but I think you're going to see more of the production centered around the 2 receivers we're going to talk about in Mekhi Lemon and Jacoby Lane, who I know you'll talk more about. But those are my first 2. My third one I had a tougher time with, Trev, because there's some quality receivers there, but it requires projection for anybody else who you're going to have on there. I went with Lewis Bond from Boston College, who I like. I like Lewis Bond a lot. He's a proven player. He caught 67 passes for 689 yards last year. He had 52 catches for 646 yards the year before that. So he's got 2 years of good production. The quarterback situation was not great last year at Boston College, but I thought he settled in, finished the year well, put up some good numbers late in the year, had some good numbers against some quality opponents last season. But he's a guy that I watch. I think he can work the quick game. He's a good route runner. He's got strong hands. And I think that with a more traditional quarterback, especially if Dylan Lonergan wins the job, I think you're going to see a guy like Lewis Bond put up some really good numbers this year. So that's my first team: Mekhi Lemon, Lewis Bond, Kevin Concepcion. If I had to go with somebody else, I actually would have gone with Eli Heidenreich, who I think is an outstanding player. I actually strongly considered putting him on my first team. You're talking about a guy last year that was over 1,000 yards of total offense for Navy last season. He's a guy that, as a slot receiver, had 39 catches for 671 yards and 6 touchdowns. Also had 65 carries for 444 yards and 3 touchdowns. So you talk about his total offensive production last season. We're talking about the guy that had 1,169 total yards on 114 touches and 9 touchdowns. You're touching the ball 90 times and you're averaging over 10 yards a touch. You're a good football player. I thought about him, but just projecting forward, I just think those other 3 guys are going to be more productive and are more impactful as actual receivers, where with Eli, you had to kind of put some of the run game stuff into that a little bit. But I thought about putting Eli on my first team, but I ended up going with those 3. I know you and I have two of the 3 the same. Trev, let's talk about your first team.
Yep. So my first team, I also have Mekhi Lemon on there for all the reasons that Brian talked about. I also have KC Concepcion on there for all the reasons that Brian talked about. Last little nugget I'll add, I think Colin Klein's going to do a lot of fun things with him, with that style of offense, with Marcel Reed, that offensive line coming back. I think you're going to see Concepcion get different types of touches. I think you're going to see him on some end around, some touch passes. I think he's going to be a kind of their gadget tool in the offense because he can do a lot of different things. And so that's where I think you're going to see him. My third guy was Jacoby Lane from USC. I've been very bullish this offseason. I do believe that USC is going to have the best receiving core from top to bottom that Notre Dame is going to face. And that's
going to be an interesting debate, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah. I go back and I look at what Jacoby Lane did a season ago. He's 6'4". He's a $195. He had 43 receptions, 525 yards, averaged 12.2 yards per catch, and he had 12 touchdowns. He's shown that he can be a red zone issue. He caught 3 passes.
Last 2 games, by the way.
Yeah.
6 against Texas A&M and Notre Dame. 6 touchdowns.
Yep. So he's been able to perform in big moments. He had 3 catches in the game against Notre Dame. All of them went for touchdowns.
For 26 yards. But yes, they were still.
But still went for touchdowns.
And they were clutch moments. They weren't like it was late in the game when they were down by 4 touchdowns. Correct.
Yep. Absolutely. So I like the compliment that he and Mekhi Lemon bring. Mekhi Lemon, he's more of the downfield threat. He's 5'11". He's a little bit more shifty, can do a little bit more after the catch. Jacoby Lane's at 6'4", $195 boundary receiver. So I like that compliment. He was my last addition to the first team. And then on second team, I know, Brian, you mentioned Lewis Bond at Boston College. I was real close going back and forth between him and Jacoby Lane. That was one of the harder decisions I had to make between who do I put on first team and who do I put on second team. It was very close.
Because you're one guy's got the volume, every down volume. The other guy has the size and the touchdown production. And when you're looking at Jacoby Lane, Trev, I would have not had an issue. I'm not pushing back on that one because I think because a lot of this we're doing is projection.
Yeah.
I think this guy's going to do this, and I think this guy's going to do this season. As I said before, I think a lot of the production for USC is going to get sort of focused more on 2 guys compared to 6. Now, there'll still be options 3, 4, and 5, and there'll be other guys getting plenty of touches, but it's not going to be as spread out as it was a year ago.
Yep.
And that's what I look at. So I have no problem with that. My other third team guy or second team guy, Trev, was a receiver from Syracuse. It's a guy that I think is going to have a breakout season, part because he's kind of the last man standing, and that's Darrell Gill. I thought he was a good player for them last year. He was sort of their number 4 option. Actually, you could even say he was their number 5 option when you look at how many balls their running back caught last season. But Darrell Gill's a tall kid from Texas, got some speed, some vertical speed, tall, skinny kid, had 31 catches for 570 yards and 2 touchdowns last year as a sophomore. And I thought he was a guy that ended the season really well because the majority of his production came in the last 3 games. He had 9 catches for 185 yards against UConn, and he had 4 catches for 145 yards in the bowl game against Washington State. So he's a guy that I look at and say, I think he is going to become much more of a focal point in an offense that no longer has a Rondé Gadsden, no longer has Trevor Pena, no longer has Jackson Meeks. He becomes that guy for them. He's not going to be completely alone. They got Jonte Cook in the portal, so he'll have some talent to take some of the pressure off. But I think he's going to be I could see him being a guy that catches like 40 balls for almost 700, 800 yards and be a good football player minimum next season. There's some other receivers we like. I can't wait for us to talk about the best receiving cores that Notre Dame's going to face this year, because the team that people are going to be surprised by that we're going to talk about is Boston College. They've got another tall kid that's on my sleeper list that I thought about putting in my second team. I know you did, Trev, and that's Reed Harris. You and I were texting about this last night. Like, dude, Boston College has a sneaky good receiving core. Big play guy. And then I like Noah Rogers, former big-time recruit from NC State. I think he takes a step up as sort of a go-to guy this season for NC State. I think he could have a big year. I think I could look back at this list, and if there's one guy that I'm like, I'm going to look back and be like, I screwed up not putting him on my first or second team, my prediction is it's going to be Noah Rogers. Loved him coming out of high school, went to Ohio State, transferred back to NC State, really talented player. And then the last guy that's on my list is I could see JoJo Trader having a bit of a breakout for Miami this season. I could see him end up becoming Miami's top pass catcher. I'm not quite ready to go all in on JoJo Trader yet, but he's a talented kid, another 6'1", had a nice touchdown catch in the bowl game. There's some good receivers on the board, but there's a lot of need for breakouts. And we're having to do a ton of projection with this group because the production is not there with most of these guys. A lot of this is projection, but there is some talented guys that were a lot of height and vertical speed on the schedule this year that Notre Dame's going to face, but just a lot of unpolished aspects of that.
Yeah, what you were bringing up about your regret of, maybe if there was a guy that you didn't leave on the first or second team, you wish you would have. I feel that way a little bit because of what my ranking was at quarterback about one of the pick guys, Kenny Johnson specifically. Last season he had 46 receptions, 537 yards, 3 touchdowns. But with him, it would, again, be a little bit more projection. He only, I don't want to say only, but only average 11.7 yards per catch. That's going to need to take a bump. I wonder how much his numbers were hindered by some of Eli Holstein's injuries down the stretch of the season. But he was somebody that I debated about putting on there. But the rest of my second team, it's Lewis Bond that I have on there. I have Latrell Caples at Boise State. He's now their kind of go-to guy, especially with Prince Strachan transferring out. I think Prince Strachan went to USC. And then the other guy that I have on there is another Boston College guy. It's I have Reed Harris and Lewis Bond on there. And Reed Harris, he's another really interesting guy. He's 6'5". He's almost 230 pounds. He had 17 catches last year, but 486 yards, 4 touchdowns. He averaged 28.6 yards per catch. And so to Brian's point, there's a lot of length, a lot of downhill speed, a lot of size on Notre Dame's kind of docket for who they play at receiver this year. So it's going to be interesting.
Let's go tight end, Trev. We had the same first and second team tight ends. We just had them flipped. My first team tight end is Justin Jolly from NC State. My second team tight end was Matt Lauder from Boise State, and I had a very tough time picking between the two. They're polar opposites of tight end in how they look and how they play, but their usage is similar. Justin Jolly is more of sort of like that H-back type of tight end. You know, he's not going to, you know, you stand him next to Eli Raridon, and they're going to look very different. Whereas Matt Lauder is going to look a lot more like Eli Raridon in certain ways. But Justin Jolly's a kid also that's part of my thing with some of these guys that I look at, Trev, is I do think C.J. Bailey's going to be really good this year. Justin Jolly last year was led second on the team in catches last year at Boston College with 40, or NC State with 43. Led the team with 661 yards, 15.4 per catch. Second on the team in touchdowns. Losing Concepcion might hurt him a little bit if they weren't, and they also lost Dakari Collins, but they've got Noah Rogers coming back, Wesley Grimes comes back, Hollywood Smothers caught some balls out of the backfield. They had 2 young receivers that I think are going to really step in. NC State's got a sneaky good group of pass catchers coming back this year, really sneaky good. And Justin Jolly's the most known of that group of tight end, very productive player last season. And then there's Matt Lauder at Boise State, who's the number 2 receiver for Boise last year, both catches, yards, led the team in touchdowns. The thing about him, Trev, is you know, he's not super tall, but he's really long, and it makes him look a little bit taller than he is. I think he's like 6'3", 6'4", 240, 250. But he's got really long arms, catches the ball extremely well. What I liked about him is he was very good he was one of the best players Penn State or Boise had against Penn State. Penn State had a very tough time with him in that game. Working the middle of the field, working the vertical stuff. I think he's a guy that's one of the better tight ends I've seen on film as I look around the country. Those 2 players, I think there's a big drop off after that. There's some solid tight ends on there. My sleeper tight end is Jeremiah Franklin from BC. He was part of a 2-man tight end rotation last year, where a lot of the production was kind of split between him and Kamari Morales, who had 28 catches. Jeremiah had 27. Kamari had 325 yards. Jeremiah had 311. Kamari had 6 touchdowns. Jeremiah had 3. As sort of like this, it looked a lot like the receivers or the 2 tight end units that Mike Denbrock used to have at Cincinnati. But with Kamari Morales gone, I think Jeremiah Franklin takes on a bunch of that production this season. They move him around a lot. They'll line him up in the slot, outside, do all that. I think he's a guy that has a chance for a big jump this year. But I still think those 2 guys are head and shoulders above everybody else.
Yeah, you and I see that the same. I had a really hard time. Before I sent you over my list, I flipped him twice. I was like, nah, it's Justin Jolly. I was like, nah, it's Matt Lauder. I kept going back and forth. And the thing that separated for me, you highlighted it, was Matt Lauder's performance in the Penn State game. Because they are very similar. Matt Lauder, 6'3", 240. Justin Jolly, I think, is 6'3", 235. Very similar production. Matt Lauder had a couple more touchdowns, but then I start looking at Matt Lauder's experience in big games, and his production in those big games. Against Penn State, he had 4 for 96 and a touchdown. Against UNLV in the conference championship, he had 5 for 62. And in the regular season, he had 4 for 38 and a touchdown against them as well. And, I go and I compare that to what Justin Jolly did. He put up good numbers as well.
He also, real quick, Matt Lauder had 4 catches for 96 yards against Washington State last year as well.
Yeah. Yep. And 2 touchdowns. And so, when I look at his production in some of the bigger games that Boise State played in, that kind of weighed in for me. But what set it over the top was definitely the Penn State game. But I am on board with everything that you said about Justin Jolly at NC State. My sleeper tight end, because there was such a big drop off, this is a big projection for me, but I went with Lake McCree, the tight end at USC. We talked a lot about the benefit of Mekhi Lemon and Jacoby Lane reeking from Zachariah Brandt's leaving, Deuce Robinson, Kyron Hudson. I think Lake McRee is going to reap some of those benefits as well. He just wasn't as involved in some of their offensive game plan last season because they had 6 mouths to feed in the receiving core. Yeah. Now I think he takes a big step up, but it is a projection because last season he was either very involved. Against LSU, he had 5 for 56. And against UCLA, he had 2 for 36. And then against Michigan, he had 3 for -3. You know, against Notre Dame, he had 1 catch for 2 yards. And so it's just so polar opposite with him. I want to see what it's going to be like, but it wouldn't surprise me if this was a miss on my end with the projection aspect of him putting as a sleeper.
I think he could play really well this year and still not be on the same level as those other 2 guys. I think those are 2. I mean, and Justin Jolly's might be a guy that's he's getting looked at as preseason All-American type of projection by some. Certainly all ACC projection. Let's move to the offensive line as we wrap up the offense, Trevor. Tackle was not as easy as you'd think. There were 3 guys that I thought all had an opportunity, and that's why I said, honestly, if I was doing just any offensive lineman, not position specific, I might have my first and second team tackles on there. And my first team tackles, I ended up going with Cage Casey from Boise State, who's an outstanding player. I went back and watched the film of him against Penn State, and just 6'5", 315. He was steady in that game against some very good defensive ends. Yeah, there's a couple times Abdul Carter, got him, or denied Dennis Sutton got him, but like he had way more wins in that game than you'd think a guy from Boise State would have. He was outstanding. Not an elite athlete, but a solid athlete, moves real clean and crisp, strong hands, good football player. And then my other first team tackle, and it actually works out perfectly because Cage Casey plays left tackle, and Francis Maya-Noah, we finally got that right. We did some research on that. I got that way wrong. I just assumed that a G sounded like a G, not an N. But hey, it is what it is. But Francis Maya-Noah, it was my other first team tackle. He's a right tackle at Miami. So it actually is left and right. So it worked out perfectly. I strongly considered Trey Zune, who was outstanding for Texas A&M last year. I just think these 2 kids are a step ahead of him. I just do. I mean, I tried to talk myself into Trey Zune just because I'm trying to be objective and not just go with who everybody, the national people have those 2 guys as first team. I wanted to really look at it. But just as good as Trey Zune was, those are 2 of the very best tackles in all of college football that they're going to face this season. So I went with those guys first team, Trey Zune second team. There's a big drop-off between him and who's next at offensive tackle. My pick is a projection. It's Elijah Page.
Yep.
He's got a lot of talent. Loved him coming out of high school. And I love the fact that he's got great size and length, and he had some moments last year he was pretty good, and some moments he was pretty bad. I'm projecting that now that he's got a year of he was a true sophomore last year as well. But now that he's got a year of experience under his belt, I'm projecting a much better season for him than he had last year, and I think that puts him above the others. There's some other guys. Markel Bell was the guy that I considered. There's not a lot of great tackles coming back after that to as you look at it. But the top is as good. I mean, that's as good of a first-team pairing with Maya-Noah and Casey as Notre Dame has on its schedule at any position this year.
Yeah, I'm with you. What Cage Casey was able to do all last season, I mean, you're talking about a team that played in their conference championship. They played in the first round of the playoffs. He didn't allow a single sack all season long. That's impressive. I really liked what I saw from Cage Casey. I'm with you on where all the other tackles are. I believe you and I have that the same because my first team tackles are also Francis Maya-Noah and Cage Casey. My second team is Trey Zune from Texas A&M and Elijah Page. So you and I see that very much the same. It was a struggle to find the fourth. I'm with you. I went with Elijah Page as well because of how high of a ceiling that he has. But it was difficult for me because, we talked a lot about how good the offensive lines are going to be for Miami and how good they're going to be for Texas A&M. A lot of that lies on the interior, which we are getting ready to talk about. But I am going to be interested to see how the rest of that pans out. But I know in the trenches, especially on offense relative, we have very similar picks here.
At guard, Trev, I think were we the same there as well? We had same guards, correct? Or did you have
Armaj Reed Adams and DJ?
Yeah, we were different. So the one guy we had in common is Armaj Reed Adams. And I'll be honest with you, Trev, I thought hard about putting Chase Basantis on the first team over Armaj. And the reason I'm with Armaj Reed Adams is because he's more of the known, consistent commodity. He played a whole season last year. He was solid all year. He's not a dynamic player. He's not a road grader. He's just a good player that gets the job done every snap. That's really what it boils down to for me is that. And Chase Basantis, however, was more inconsistent, but when he was on, he was more dominant. He was banged up a little bit last year. This is one of those ones where I'm going to look back and be like, hold on, you had a different A&M guard on the first team than Chase Basantis. Like, that's what I think we're going to look back and see. But it's going to require projection. So I went with more of the known commodity for me. The Fernando Carmona projection or pick is a little bit interesting because he played tackle for Arkansas last year and was not a good tackle. But he was a really dynamic run defender when they were running, when he was down blocking, and he just wasn't great in space and wasn't good in pass pro. Big, massive kid, though. They moved him inside to guard at Arkansas. They actually took both of their tackles and moved him into guard this year. And then they got the kid that started at left tackle for Georgia Tech last year, transferred to Arkansas. So I really like Carmona at guard. Now, this is a projection because I'm projecting him a position he didn't play last year. But when you look at him, when he's asked to play in tight quarters and just be a dominant run blocker, he was pretty good for Arkansas last year. So I projected it a little bit on that one, but I like him there. And I didn't want to have two A&M guys in the first team. So if I'm going with two projection guys, I'm going to go with the guy that's got a little bit more experience on him. But I also consider DJ Wingfield, who is my other second-team guard. He's a transfer from Purdue who's going to USC. But, again, he's got to be more consistent in my view. I don't know how much of that was just being a part of a bad team. Like, those are things that we look at. So those are my two guards.
Yeah, fair enough. Where it came down to me, because I have the only ones that I have flipped, I have DJ Wingfield on my first team and Fernando Carmona from Arkansas as my second. And it's going to take projection for both. With DJ Wingfield, was Purdue just that bad? And Fernando Carmona, it's like, okay, how are you going to handle the adjustment from tackle to guard? Like we talked about on the show, there's a lot of teams, there's a lot of players that can make that transition. Notre Dame specifically recruits a lot of tackles that have the ability to play both. I just don't know that much about Fernando Carmona to say, oh, well, Charles Jagasaw did it, so I think that Carmona could also do it. You know what I mean? So I went back and I looked at what DJ Wingfield did because Purdue was so bad last year. And in some of the bigger games that they played, it wasn't, I mean, he only allowed one pressure against Oregon, no sacks, one hit on the quarterback, not great. He ended the season with 3 hits and 3 sacks on the quarterback. Didn't allow a sack against Oregon or Ohio State, allowed 1 against Penn State, didn't allow any against Indiana either. And so I look at that and I am going to give enough projection that I do believe that him playing around a better offense, maybe a more mobile-ish quarterback. I'm willing to say that Jade Maeva is a more mobile guy than what Hudson Card was for Purdue. That could help out some of his numbers as well. But I think being surrounded by better talent is going to carry him a little bit.
Center Mason Randolph is my pick for Boise State. He was banged up a lot last year, played early, missed the whole season, came back. I thought he struggled a little bit in the Penn State game, which was sort of my hesitation of putting him on the first team over James Brockermeyer. But when I went back and looked at his film pre-injury, he's a pretty good player. And I'm projecting him forward as a team that's going to still want to run the football. He's an athletic kid, physical kid. I think he's the guy that I project. James Brockermeyer is my second team center. James is the most steady of the two. Like, no question. He's been a steady player. His dad played college football. His brother played at Alabama. His brother was a big-time recruit. He played at Texas as well. Maybe his brother played Texas. He was committed to Alabama. I don't know. He was, you know how those things go. But I like James Brockermeyer, steady player, consistent. He was solid for TCU last year, transfers to Miami. He's now going to be starter at Miami. He's the easy pick for me. He would have been the easy pick. I went with the projection, though. I like Mason Randolph a lot. And even though he struggled, he was leaning too much. He was kind of getting out of his, ahead of himself. He'd lose his balance against Penn State. But when he came off with a good base, he could move the Penn State guards off the line or defensive tackles off the line. So I saw some really good things. So I'm going with, now that he's healthy, got a full season under his belt, I think he's going to be their best center. Had James Brockermeyer second. The sleeper for me is Mark Naboo. And the reason I couldn't put him on there is because he may not even start for A&M. He was going to be their starting center last year, got hurt. And then the guy that replaced him is coming back. So I don't know for a fact that Naboo is going to start for them this year. If he does, means he beat out a returning starter, he could end up skyrocketing up this list and end up being first team by the end of the year on this list. But he was a guy, USC had a transfer from Syracuse who's a solid player. I'm not quite – I watched his film, Trev. He was steady. There was just nothing I loved about him. But, like, it's kind of the point you made with DJ Wingfield and a different system. How's he going to fit into that with different players around him, bigger players around him? How's he going to do? But I'm going with Mason Randolph. Lindy Sports, their first team All-ACC center was Zach Rice. I got a big kick out of that. Because, like, this dude couldn't earn more than 40 snaps in 3 years at North Carolina. But he's going to go to Syracuse and be a first-team All-ACC player. What are you talking about?
Yeah, you and I were texting about that one. That one,
like, seriously, like, are you just going off recruiting rankings at this point in time?
Probably. You and I had the same centers. We just flipped them. I had James Brockermeyer as the first, and literally the only thing that set him aside for me was that consistency piece. He started all 12 games for TCU in the regular season. Didn't give up a lot. I think he gave up 9 total pressures all season.
And I think 4 of them came in one game against Baylor.
Yeah.
Like, he just had that bad game.
Yep.
And even in that game, I went back and watched it, and he wasn't getting destroyed. A couple times he got driven off the line. He got, guy had a really nice swim move on him one time. He was still solid. He's as steady as you're going to see. It's just there's nothing dynamic about him. He's not going to blow you off the ball and dominate. But he's just going to he's that guy we used to play, and when we were in high school playing like pickup basketball. And there's like that real kind of like nerdy looking guy that's not super athletic, but he's like his dad's like a basketball coach, and he's not real talented, but he's got perfect technique, and he's like beating you to spots, and you can't get around. I'm like, dude, what's going on right now? Like, how is this kid like D'ing me up right now? But then you figure it out, and but then other guys who are more athletic than I was or more natural basketball players are going to tear him up. You know what I mean? Like, that's James Brockermeyer. Dad played the position, brother played the position. He's just real steady.
Yeah.
And that's why I totally understand having him on the first team. I just think Randolph can be more dominant.
Sure.
If he can be more consistent. That was my projection. But if it's off of who's the better player today, I'm okay going with Brockermeyer.
I get that completely. But yep, that's my first team all opponent offense, first and second team.
Now, let's do this before we move on to the defense. One thing we like to do is where would Notre Dame players fit in this mix? So, how I look at it is it's basically looking at creating the list as if we considered not just the 12 teams, but the 12 teams plus Notre Dame. So, it's now 13 teams in the mix. And here's what I had. And I had a tough time with this one, Trevor, very tough time with this one. And I tried to be as much as I could a non-homer. There were some that were easy, though. And on offense and defense, the easy one on offense is Jeremiah Love, a running back.
Yeah.
Love Le'Veon Moss. He's not as good as Jeremiah Love. And even in the matchup against each other, Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price outplayed Le'Veon Moss. Mm-hmm. You could make a case for Jadarian being your second team back, but I'm still going Le'Veon because I think Le'Veon's going to have a very good season this year for A&M. That was so I still have Horvath at quarterback. I don't have a lot of guys that have never played. I don't have any guys that have never played on my list. So I did not consider CJ Carr just because we've never seen the kid throw a pass in college football. So he's not even on my list. But Jeremiah Love is on my list. The other one is I had Jaden Greathouse and Malachi Fields at receiver. Greathouse is the second one. Fields is the first one on my list because Fields is more proven over a period of time. Fields is the easiest one to get. He's the best receiver on the board. If you look at past production plus size, traits, and future projection, he's number one. And then Mekhi Lemon is number two. I went with Greathouse over Concepcion just because I think he's he's just a better athlete, in my opinion. He's stronger, and he's more impactful in some of the bigger moments, and he can do more down the field. than Concepcion. And I know that Concepcion's numbers 2 years ago were better. They're from the same grade, but I think Jaden Greathouse is just the better talent. And we started to see that at times last year. And I'm projecting that Jaden's going to be a very good player. If you want to have Concepcion on there over Jaden Greathouse, I'm not going to argue with you, but I'm pretty confident in saying that if I could pick between the two, if I was building a Notre Dame team and I could pick between the two, I'm going with Jaden Greathouse over Kevin Concepcion and Lewis Bond, who are both – they're all very similar players in how they play. Honestly, I think Greathouse is just bigger and stronger and better.
Yeah, up to the – did you have anybody else on offense? Or...
Yeah, I just went skill guys first.
Okay, I got you. Yeah, we see that the same. I didn't put any weight into anybody that hadn't played yet. So I had Jeremiah Love on there. I had Malachi Fields on there. I had Greathouse on there. And for skill guys, I think that was it. I did think about putting Jadarian Price on my second team, though. Yeah,
so we're the same there. Offensive line, I had a tough time because I'm trying not to project too much. And I wanted to put Charles Jaggis on my first team, but I just couldn't do it because we're talking about a guy that's literally has 2 career starts over the course of 2 seasons. I do have him on my second team. My first team player from Notre Dame on the offensive line is Billy Schrauth.
Yep.
I took off Fernando Carmona, put on Billy Schrauth. I think Billy's just the more talented player. He's not as big as Fernando, but he's just a better player, better athlete. And has played guard where Carmona is making that transition. I really thought about putting Charles Jagusah, and I won't be shocked at all if both Jagusah and Schrauth are on my first team by the end of the year. But I just it's like with a lot of things, I just need to see Charles do it for more than a couple games to put him on there. But it was hurt because I think he might be the most talented interior offensive lineman on the board, and I don't know that it's close. And the only guy that's really close talent-wise is Billy Schrauth. But it's just that's a big jump from 2 career starts to first team all opponent. So like I said, I tried to take my homer hat off on that one and be objective about it. And then the other offensive lineman I have Emil Wagner, second team, and it's not close. Emil Wagner's a good football player. But again, guys, Cage Casey and Francis Mauanoa are 2 of the best tackles in all of college football. They are elite offensive tackles. And Emil is very good, but he's going to have to – if Emil Wagner is in the same conversation at the end of the year with those 2 kids, he's probably done at Notre Dame after 2025. He's probably going to the first round of the NFL draft next year. Like, that's how good those 2 guys are. Emil could be a second-team All-American and be second-team All-American because those are the 2 first-team All-Americans. Like, that's how good, in my opinion, Cage Casey and that's his brother, Francis Mauanoa are at tackle.
We have the same offensive lineman. I took out DJ Wingfield on my first team, and I slid in Billy Schrauth, and then I took Elijah Page out of my second team and put it in Emil Wagner. We see that the same.
Yeah. I could see Ashton Craig jumping into this list as well, but again, we're talking about a guy that's coming off of a knee injury that started 3 games last year. Like, if he would be my sleeper over Mark Naboo when we put all these guys together.
Fair.
Because I think he could – because I thought Ashton was playing very good football when he got hurt.
Yeah.
He was pretty good against – he had the one bad hold, but the hold was like 4 or 5 yards downfield. It was just unnecessary. He was dominating the guy. So he's there. So that's the offensive list, Trev. You got 4 Notre Dame guys on the first team list. If you look at the total numbers of – you take the Notre Dame players off, I had 3 players from Texas A&M on my first team. And what's interesting is the team that I had next is Boise. I had 2 guys from Boise on my list. I had 1 player from Navy, 1 player from USC, 1 player from NC State, 1 player from Miami, 1 player from Arkansas. That was my first team offense, was made up that way.
Nice. Yep. Yeah, I had 3 from Texas A&M. I had 3 from USC. I had 2 from Boise, and then 1 from Pitt, 2 from Miami. So, yep.
So that's the offensive breakdown. We're going to go to defense next, folks. But before we do us a favor, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast. Let us know what you guys think. If you're going to say, I wouldn't have this guy on there, then tell us who you would have on there. That's kind of what makes it fun, as opposed to saying, I think you're nuts for having those 2 guys on there. Give us who you would have on there. That makes for a good case, because with a lot of these, Trev, there is debate to be had. We have it, And some of them we're not even super comfortable with the ones we have because there's a lot of similarities between certain players, and that's part of the fun. So we like to hear your picks as well. If you want to disagree with ours, that's also part of the fun. Just let us know who you would have instead and why, and make your case, which, again, we never know. We might be persuaded. So you can do all that. But of course, as always, folks, make sure you are checking us out and you are members of the premium board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Trevor Trowbridge, man, let's dive into the defense because this was a very interesting one. Very similar on offense where there's some positions that were very strong and others where you're like, I don't really like putting any of these guys on the first team. And so we're going to dive into that. But I want to start off on defense with a position that was absolutely a strong position and especially at the top. But we're going to start off with DN, then go D tackle. We're going to talk linebackers, safeties, then corners. And we will tell you who our specialists were, but we're not going to spend a whole lot of time breaking down the specialists. Some of those are pretty easy. The kick returner and punt returners were super easy. And, kicker, punter, not quite as easy. You're just kind of looking at numbers, and I'll be honest, I didn't study their film. I just went with who had the best numbers. Just going to tell you all that right now. But I love breaking down film, but I'm just not breaking down punter and kicker film. I'm just not going to do it. But let's start at defensive end, Trev. And my two defensive ends were pretty easy. My first team defensive end picks were pretty easy. My first, and also it's not just easy, but they would fit together in a real defense. I have a power end and more of a 2-point stance, long athletic guy. My two first team defensive ends, I have Ruben Bain Jr. from Miami and Jaden Virgin Morgan from Boise State. I love these two kids on film. Now, Bain was not great last year. He was injured a lot, banged up, not 100%. He was pretty good in the bowl game, at least as a pass rusher. There was some inconsistency as a run defender that game. But if you go back and look to him as a freshman when he was healthy, and you start kind of projecting that to now he's healthy, he's now a junior. As a true freshman in 2023, Ruben Bain had 44 tackles, 12.5 tackles for loss, and 7.5 sacks. He's an outstanding player, 270-plus pound defensive end. There's been some talk that Miami's thought about moving him inside, and I think that's kind of gone away as they went and got some guys in the portal to play inside. I do think there will be some times that you will see Ruben Bain inside in certain looks. I personally like him in college on the end. I don't know about NFL, but on the college, I like him as a power end. He'd be that strong side end in the Notre Dame defense. Very explosive first step for a big kid. Really dynamic athlete for his size. To me, the comparison, if you're like comparing him to a player, there's a lot of Nick Scorton in his game, but I think he's even more explosive athletically than what Nick Scorton was. Very long, powerful, had 45 pressures as a freshman, 19 hits plus sacks on the quarterback. And even last year in his down year as a true sophomore, Trev, he still finished the season in only playing 9 games with 23 tackles, 5.5 tackles for loss, 3.5 sacks, and still had 28 pressures and 8 hits plus sacks on the quarterback. So not as productive a year. You could easily attribute it, though, to just health and not being healthy. Getting him back healthy is going to be huge for the Miami defense. He's my first team big end. And then Jaden Virgin Morgan, Virgin Morgan, I think it's Virgin. I hope it's Virgin. I'm calling him Virgin because it just sounds weird. But he's a guy I look back and watched him again. I want to watch him against Oregon, watch him against Penn State. He was dominant against the G5 level. But even when you watch him in those games, like, this kid absolutely belongs. This kid belongs on this level and was a good football player for them last year. Had, I think it was 15.5 sack tackles for loss last season as a sophomore, 10 sacks, 7 more quarterback hurries, 40. He had 40 pressures last season for them. He's a 6'5", long, athletic guy, very good football player, and he's young. He's going to continue to get better. Very disruptive. They had a very dynamic 1-2 punch at defensive end last year. They lost. I'm not sure how to pronounce Ahmad's last name, but they lost to those two guys. He had 43 total pressures, 19 hits plus sacks on the quarterback last season. Had a pressure against Oregon, had a pressure against Penn State. I thought he played pretty well against Penn State. I thought he's pretty good on the point of attack, on the edge. Had some nice hurt pressures in that game. I only got credited with one, but I thought there were several that you could have maybe said, hey, that's a pretty good rush right there against one of the better offensive lines in the country. Also had 3 pressures against UNLV, including a sack in the Mountain West title game. Had 3 pressures against Oregon State. Had 4 pressures and 2 sacks against John Mateer at Oklahoma State, at Washington State, who's now at Oklahoma. He played well in some big games. Had 4 pressures in the regular season game against UNLV. Probably didn't play as well against Oregon, but again, young guy. By the end of the year, I'm also projecting forward. He's a really good football player. So those are my 2 first-team defensive ends. And again, they fit together. One kid would be a Viper in the Notre Dame defense. The other one would be an end in the Notre Dame defense. Very talented players.
Yeah, our defensive ends on first and second team are the exact same. Jaden Vergen Morgan, I'll just call him JVM. JVM stats are nuts. I mean, 15.5 tackles for a loss. He was tied with the lead last year as a sophomore. Finished the year with 10 sacks. He played well. Watched the film. He played well in some of their bigger moments as well. JVM is definitely going to be a dude. Definitely going to be one of the best defensive ends that Notre Dame faces. And then with Miami, to your point, agree with everything you said about Reuben Bain. He's getting a lot of pre-draft hype as well. Like I've been seeing his name floating around there down the road.
Yeah.
Yep. So that's going to be a tough stretch when Notre Dame has to face them for sure.
Yes. Second team, Trevor, there was a drop off for me when I look at the first team and second team. I don't think the second team is as good as the first team, but it's still good. And I think there's a chance for it to be even more productive. One of my first team ends, or my second team ends, is Cassius Howell, who is at Texas A&M. He transferred to A&M last year from Boise State. In 2023, Bowling Green. In 2023 at Bowling Green, he had 10.5 tackles for loss, 9.5 sacks. Last year, as part of a rotation at Texas A&M, he had 8.5 tackles for loss and 4.5 sacks. Again, as part of a rotation, you had Shamar Stewart, who he was way more productive than Shamar Stewart, but he played a lot. And then, of course, they had Nick Scorton on the edge as well. And there were times when Shamar Turner would play on the edge. But I like Cassius Howell. I don't know. He's not the elite athlete that's the guys that the elite power player like some of the guys they had last year. He's a very good football player. You had 34 pressures, which was 2 behind Nick Scorton last season and only 5 behind Shamar Stewart. But he had 221 pass rush snaps compared to 315 and 316 for Stewart and Scorton. So if you look at his numbers, he had more hits on the quarterback than Scorton and Stewart did last year. Like he actually got to the quarterback more than those 2 guys did, despite playing 90 fewer snaps. So, I like Cassius Howell, good football player. I don't know what kind of NFL prospect he is. I just know he's a good college football player. And I think he's going to obviously be more productive this year as he becomes more of the number 1 guy. And then the other one on my list, and I'll tell you what, man, there are some names this year that I'm having a hard time pronouncing. But last year, Boston College had a kid named, I'm going to try my best, Donovan Izuriaku, who was really good for BC last year. And he was a all-ACC player. I'm pretty sure he got drafted this year. Actually, let me pull up that profile real quick. He got drafted in the 2nd round by the Cowboys. 6'2", 247. A lot of Harold Landry, vibes you're getting back watching him play. And you're losing him, and you're like, man, that's going to be a tough loss. But I'm going with a bit of a projection here. They had a young player. Actually, it shouldn't even be a young player. They had another end that was part of that rotation who I've watched on film that I think is going to have a breakout season in that defense, and that is Quintavious Hutchins, 6'3", 245-pound kid from Boston College. Last year had 25 pressures, 13, and this is what got me. He only had 25 pressures on 233 pass rush attempts or pass rush snaps, but he had 13 hits plus sacks in the quarterback. He had 9 hits in the quarterback. So this is a kid that was he was close on a lot of plays. And now you don't have one of the best pass rushers in the country on the other side of the field, which, say, okay, it's going to take some of he was taking pressure off of you. But I also think that this kid, Quintavious, is going to step in and kind of be that sort of impact player. It's a very disruptive defense just in general. They like to attack. They like to get sacks. They like to force turnovers. And he's going to fit that and be pretty good at it. He dropped in coverage a little bit last year as well. So he brings a little bit of that to the table, but he's a very good football player. That is my next end on the list.
Yeah, we see that the same. We have the same second team as well. And I put Quintavious Hutchins in there also because it's a necessity. Because you are losing Donovan, not even going to attempt his last name, but Donovan E., you're losing him. So you need somebody else to step up. You're talking about you need to replace somehow 20 or help replace 20 and a half tackles for a loss and 16 and a half sacks in a season. That's a lot of production that needs made up. But I think that Quintavious Hutchins can help start to fill that void a little bit. So I'm with you.
And last year was his first year in the rotation. I mean, he barely played his first 2 years. So, and I don't think he is the NFL prospect that Donovan was. I don't think he's that type of player, but I think we're going to see a similar jump in production from him. You know, Donovan had a really good year 2 years ago. In 2022, he had 14 and a half tackles for loss and 8.5 sacks. So it's not like he came out of nowhere last year, but he had a down year in 2023. Only had 6.5 tackles for loss and 2 sacks in 13 games, and then got back on track. So I think that Quintavious lacks some of the maybe NFL tools that Donovan brought to the table, and I don't foresee him getting 20 and a half tackles for loss. I don't see him having the sack numbers. I don't see him having 16 and a half sacks like Donovan had last year. But I can certainly see him being a double-digit tackle for loss guy this year and a 7 to 8 sack guy this year, which would put him in sort of that second team category with Cassius out.
Sure.
Guy to keep an eye on, Travali Price from NC State is a guy that I have as sort of my watch list guy. Different type of end. It's more of a 3-down end. I think he might even be a 3 technique in a traditional defense. He's 6'4", 285, had a solid year last year for NC State. I think he's a guy to keep an eye on for a potential breakout season this year as well. So those are the ends that are on my board, Trev.
Yeah, the one guy that I have on my list for a potential breakout is Akeem Mesidor from Miami. I was doing some research on him, just some of the best. I did a lot of research on Miami's defensive line because there's been a lot of talk about them. And Akeem Mesidor, he has a 86.1 PFF grade since joining Miami in 22. He's second among returning power 4 edge defenders, which isn't too bad. So him, it's a little bit more projection. With the remaining common theme here, and I know we're about to dig into defensive tackles, a lot of my picks outside of the 2 edges on the first team, there's a lot of projection for me on the defensive line.
Yep. Totally get that. Another end to keep an eye on. I think he's Jimmy Scott from Pitt had 12 and a half tackles for loss and 6 sacks last year. Good football player. When I broke down his film, and I only watched 2 games of him, but he seems more like a guy that's just kind of like the system generates a lot from the system. I don't know that he's the individual player, but he's another guy that his production alone warrants consideration for that second team category as well. But I just like the other guys a little bit better on film. Yeah, but he's a good player that also comes from a system that's all about being disruptive.
Well, and another thing,
go ahead, Trev.
Sorry, real quick. Just another thing that was a little tough on this was there's a lot of teams on Notre Dame's schedule that had some transfer DNs come in this year too, and it's hard to gauge. Okay, you did this at your previous school, but a lot of those schools were like FCS, and it's like I can't gauge that in comparison to somebody that did it at Miami or Texas A&M.
And a couple guys from USC, Anthony Lucas, is he going to be healthy and finally do something for them this year? Like, I mean, that's one to consider. Cameron Fountain was a solid player for them last year. I mean, he was another guy that I looked at. There's a lot of guys like that, Trev, where you're just like, some talent there, but he's never done anything. Most of those guys have at least shown you something, and that's where I'm at. Let's move to D-tackle, Trev, and I'll have you start this one with who you had on the first team, because this is one where we had some differences between each other.
Yeah, defensive tackle for my first team, I went with Braxton Feely at Boise State. I liked what he did last year for them. It was a huge get. He entered his name into the portal, and he ended up withdrawing his name from the portal at the end of spring. So he's back with their defensive line. Last season, he had 24 total tackles. He had 5.5 sacks. Tackles for a loss. Give me just a second. Tackles for a loss. He was 5th on the team with 9. He's a bigger interior lineman, especially for the G5 level. He's 6'1". He's 300 pounds. He fluctuates in between 295 and 300 pounds throughout the course of the season. But he's going to be a core of that Boise State defensive line. So I put him on my first team as well. And then again, with his experience playing in the postseason, I mean, he played against Penn State. He played against UNLV twice, but again, against UNLV in the, conference championship. Then he played on the road against Oregon. So that's pretty good experience for a returning group of 5 guy on the interior. My second guy is literally majority projection. And I went with an interior defensive lineman from Arkansas. And there's going to be a common theme with a lot of the interior defensive linemen that I have in here. He didn't do nothing in 2024.
Yeah,
he was 5th on the team. He had 4 tackles for a loss. Talking about Cameron Ball, he had 1.5 sacks. Finished the year, with 46 total tackles. But last year, Notre Dame's interior offensive line really struggled with an interior defensive lineman with size. And Cameron Ball is somebody that has that in the plenty. He's 6'5", he's 324 pounds. He's from Atlanta. He's big old number 5 in there on the interior. Something with those interior defensive linemen now love wearing the single digits. Think make them look a little bigger. But there's a little bit of projection in there. But I went with what Notre Dame struggled with last season. I think back to who they struggled with, like the Michael Williams. They struggled with him. They struggled with Zeke Biggers over the course of the season. And Cameron Ball kind of fits that profile of that big interior defensive lineman. So that's my first team. But with him, it is a little bit of projection. But yes. I weighed a little bit of who they played against, what they did. He on the road against Missouri, he had 7 total tackles. At home against Ole Miss, he had 5 total tackles. And so Cameron Ball is my first team guy there.
What's interesting is, Trevor, is I have him second team. His film is a little more impressive than his numbers. Like when you watch him on film, like I spent a lot of time watching him against Texas A&M, and because like that's probably the best guard duo, one of the best guard duos he played all year. And there's things he's got to improve on. He's got to use his hands better. But he, for a 6'5", 325-pound guy, he moves pretty well. He's not just a big sit in the middle of the line, plugger, space eater kind of guy. That's what I was surprised by when I was breaking down film of all the different players. I liked him. The difference between, if I didn't feel the way that I felt about Landon Robinson, then we'd be having a different conversation. And I would have him there. And Landon Robinson is you and I both have Brandon Cleveland. You said, or no, we had the same first and second team, but ours are flipped, right? Like your second team. You don't have Landon Robinson at all. That's right, because you don't watch Navy film. I'm totally kidding. But I have Braxton Feely second team. I have Cameron Ball second team. My first team guy is Brandon Cleveland. I liked him on film last year, Trev. I think he's a good player. They use him in that sort of that nose position in a 3-down look. I'm very curious how he's going to be used this year with a new defensive coordinator, but I do understand that NC State's still going to be that 3-down look. But his numbers weren't sexy. 36 tackles, 3.5 tackles for loss, half a sack. He's a bigger kid, but his pressure numbers were pretty decent last year for a nose tackle. And when I say nose tackle, I mean like a true nose, they're asking him to 2-gap and eat space and all that kind of stuff. But he still had some quality numbers last season for them. He had 19 pressures last season. He was 4th on the NC State defense in pressures. He also had 18 run stops in a position where they don't ask him to do a whole lot of that. But overall, I thought his film was impressive. I think him and Cameron Ball, I was kind of torn between the two of them because they're very similar. Their film looks better than their numbers, both of them. And so those are those guys that you're like, if you just look at stats and you're not going to appreciate how tough of a matchup that guy's going to be. But Ashton Craig's going to have his hands full this year. There's no doubt about that with some of these guys. I went with Landon Robinson because he's the best defensive tackle on their schedule as far as what they do in college. Very good football players. So I look at them and say, hey, man, yes, he's 6 foot. He's 290. I doubt he's any kind of NFL prospect. But you pop on the film and you're like, this guy's a good football player. And not only that, but he had, 2 carries last year? Was it 2 catches? Oh,
I think it was – I know he had 2 touches. Right? I know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But he had the big one against Army, if you remember that. If you remember the guy that carried the ball, or had the ball late in the year or late in that game. He had 2 carries for 63 yards. I think most of that came on 1 carry. That's not why he's on there. He's 61 tackles last year, very productive, 5.5 tackles for loss. 4 sacks, very disruptive. He had 28 pressures last season, 13 hits plus sacks on the quarterback. He had one of the very few pressures they had against Notre Dame. He had 2 pressures and a sack against Oklahoma. He was very good against Oklahoma. Had 3 pressures against Memphis. A very disruptive player. Was very good against Army. He was a big reason why they shut Army down in that game. He's an outstanding football player. If he played somewhere other than Navy, people would be talking about him a lot more. Same size, same height. That's a good football player. Very good football player. So he's my first team guy, and I had Ball and Feely on the second team. I'm with you on Cameron Ball. There's good film there. If he can just kind of take that next jump, he's a guy that I think people are going to be talking a lot about more when you talk about some of the better nose tackles that they face. And he lines up over the guard a lot too. It's not like he's like a over the center plugger.
Yeah,
they move him all around, so he'll play all around. A couple guys. David Blay is a transfer Miami got from Louisiana Tech that I like on film. Haven't seen as much of him as others. He's a little bit more streaky than some of the other guys on the board, which is what I didn't like about him. If you're streaky at the G5 level, that concerns me a little bit about your transition to this level. And that's one of the reasons that I didn't have David Blay on my first or second team. But it wouldn't shock me if at the end of the year we're talking about him as being like that was a heck of a pickup for for Miami. It's just when your numbers aren't as good as Power 5 guys, then that concerns me. But if you watch highlights or you just watch his best plays, he had a play against Arkansas where he just destroys the center and flies into the backfield, makes a sack. But then he doesn't do anything for 4 or 5 plays. That's going to be the thing for him of how good of a pickup that's going to be is can you be more consistent? The tools are flashy. But when I watch and see what Landon Robinson does at the G5 level, and then I see what David Blay does at the G5 level, it's not even close. Even though David Blay might be a guy that more NFL teams look at, he's not the better college player. But he's a guy that I looked at as well. Justin Scott from Miami is another guy that, highly ranked recruit. Could he break out? Outside of that, Trevor, I'll be honest, there were not a ton of great defensive tackles on the board outside the guys we just talked about. And even the starters, there's a big difference between Ruben Bain and Jaden Vergen-Morgan and Landon Robinson and Brandon Cleveland or Braxton Feely and Cameron Ball, your first teamers. Very big difference. And it's kind of like tackle and guard on offense. The interior is not nearly as strong as the edge. The edges are strong. Interior quality football players, but not game changers on the board right now.
Yeah, the defensive line unit this year is kind of how the running back unit was last year of Notre Dame's opponents. At the top, it's okay, these are some dudes that we're talking about now. And then afterwards, it's eh. I mean, the last guy on my second team, man, he probably could have just been a sleeper pick for me, but I went with Ahmad Moten from Miami. Last season, he was 3rd in the ACC in PFF power or pass rushing grades. So he's a good interior defensive pass rusher. I think he pairs well with Ruben Bain, but again, he's one of those guys that statistically his numbers don't jump off at you. I think he had 3 sacks, 3 hits on the quarterback, 15 hurries last season, but along the interior, I
14
that's
hurries, 2
terrible.
sacks, 3 hits.
So not bad.
That's part of rotation, by the way. Keep that in mind. He had 163 pass rush snaps, so those numbers weren't as getting the same number of snaps that Howard Cross got at nose tackle. He had 163 pass rush snaps. So for a 6'3", 325-pound guy.
Yep. So
and also Trev, he had 6 pressures in the last 4 games, 10 pressures in the last 6 games. So if you're talking about projecting into 2024, to your point, the finish was really good. Can he carry that into the season is going to be the question for him.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. I appreciate you providing some numbers there because that's where I was going. So thank you, sir.
Yeah. You're welcome. Let's talk linebacker, Trev.
Let's do it.
I know I'm looking at our list. We have the same first team linebackers. I think this was pretty easy. And not because there's not good linebackers on the second team. There are. But some of these guys are some of the better linebackers in the country. And I've got 2 kids from Pitt and 1 kid from Texas A&M on there. I want to talk about Kyle Lewis. This kid, I'm watching his film, And I'm like, this kid is fun to watch. Like, he's their Jalen Smith. Like, wears number 9, very athletic, dreads. Like, he's not as good as Jalen Smith, but like, that's the Pitt version of Jalen Smith. They play a true 3 linebacker defense still. And the 2 kids they have on the outside are both undersized. I think Lewis is listed as 6 foot 225. I'm not sure if he's 225 pounds. He doesn't look it. And then the other one is Rasheem Biles, who's listed at like 215 pounds. So they're undersized, but these kids can flat out run. And in order to have a 3 linebacker look with a 4 down line, you better have linebackers who can cover and run. And that's what I really like about these 2 guys. They're super disruptive. They fly around the ball, good block destruction. They make a ton of plays against the run. So like, they're not just like pass rushers. And they're actually like very productive football players who can play the run. They're not big and they know it. So they don't try to just step into the hole and anchor against guards. They're going to try to beat you to a side. The production they both had last year was outstanding. Kyle Lewis last season had 101 tackles, 15.5 tackles for loss, 7 sacks. So that's 8.5 run game tackles for loss. He also had 4 interceptions and 3 breakups. Rasheem Biles at 6'1", 215 had 82 tackles, 14.5 tackles for loss, 5.5 sacks. He had 9 breakups and a pick. So between the 2 of them, they had 12 pass breakups and 5 interceptions on top of having a combined 12.5 sacks. They disrupt the pass game in a big, big way, whether they're working this way or that way. And Kyle Lewis's range, sideline range, is as good as there is in the country.
Yep.
Like, there was a play, I can't remember which game I was watching, but he steps in and he takes on the guard, and the play bounces. And he's in a stopped position, and he takes off running and chases the guy down for like a 2-yard gain. I mean, he is an outstanding football player. And then on the very next snap, in a situation like that, you'll see him open up and run in with a seam route. Like, he is an outstanding all-around football player. Might be the best linebacker in the country, in my opinion. Like, there are not many guys that you're going to see ever that are as dynamic in every phase of the game. Maybe some more bigger guys, more talented guys, but this kid's ability to impact as a run defender, as a pass rusher, and as a cover guy he is the modern linebacker. I just wish he was 2 inches taller and a little bit longer. But this kid is an outstanding college football player. Outstanding.
Couldn't agree with that more. Couldn't echo that more. The 2 Pitt linebackers, they're going to be in the discussion. I mean, I know we're going to talk about position rankings and like unit rankings later on in the offseason, and it's a good bet that Pitt's going to be pretty high up on that list for both of us because they have a really, really good linebacking core. The third guy on that list for us, both of us, is Torian York from Texas A&M. Notre Dame faced against him last year. He's a really productive football player. Last season, he ended with, give me just a second here. Last season, Torian York, he ended with 82 total tackles. He had 4 passes defended. He had an interception last year. He had 2.5 sacks. He's active. Also not crazy size. He's 6 foot. He's 235. He's a smart football player. And him going into year 2 of playing under Mike Elko, who's a defensive-minded coach, I think he's off for I think he's going to be poised for a big year. And he's going to be, ideally, if he can stay healthy, paired back again with Scooby Williams, a linebacker that I have on my second team. He was banged up a little bit last year. But Scooby Williams, he's 6'2", he's 230, finished last season with 43 total tackles. He's a transfer from Florida, transferred in from Florida after the 2023 season. Yep. And so I think that linebacker pairing could be really interesting to talk about. But
Scooby,
yes,
so to your point on Scooby, Mike Elko announced this. I think the coach, I don't know where he was, but in an interview recently, I read this. He said that Scooby Williams played last season with a torn meniscus, partially torn meniscus, and still had 7.5 tackles for loss last season. Very athletic kid. And the thing I like too about those 2 guys, Travis, they're both going into year 2 of that system.
Mm-hmm.
So I expect them to both be much more effective.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. Absolutely. But
he's another smaller guy. Not Scooby. Scooby actually has pretty good size. Torian York's another one of those. I don't know what the NFL thinks of him because of his size, but he's a heck of a college football player. He's like 6 foot 230.
Yep.
But he's not an elite athlete, good athlete, just smart, tough, physical, around the ball a lot, had 82 tackles last year, 9.5 tackles for loss. He had more assists than solos last year. I think that flips a little bit this year in year 2 of the system. So.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, in some of the bigger games that they played last season, he was all over the field. Over the field. At home against Texas to finish the season, he had 5 tackles. He had 1 sack, 5 solo tackles. On the road against South Carolina, he had 8 tackles. In the season opener, he had 9 total, 6 assisted, 3 solo tackles. So Torian York is all over the field consistently.
Second team, we both had Scooby Williams, as you mentioned. The interesting thing about linebacker this year is there's a lot of similar guys. The 6 foot to 6'1", 215-ish pounds, 220 pounds that can run. Another example of that is Xavier Sorey at Arkansas. If he could be a better tackler, I would consider him for a guy being on the first team because his numbers last year were very good. He had 99 tackles, 40 solos, 9.5 tackles for loss, 2 sacks. If he could just tackle better, he's at 110, 112 sacks last year, or tackles last year. He's got to tackle better. He's out of control more. It doesn't take great angles, so he misses a lot of tackles. But he's still, even with that, still a very good football player. BC has a guy that I think is going to have a really big year this year, Trev. Another guy that's not the biggest guy in the world, but can really run. I'm predicting a much bigger year from him this year, and that's Davion Crouch. Another 6'1", 225-pound guy. Last year was his first year in starting lineup. 77 tackles, 6.5 tackles for loss, 2 sacks. Rangy kid, can run all over the field. And then another linebacker that's sort of a couple guys. USC has a couple guys I'm intrigued by. Can Eric Gentry stay healthy? If he can stay healthy, he's a guy to keep an eye on. 215 pounds also, but 6'6", very rangy guy. And if you look at Eric Gentry's numbers last year, before he got hurt, Trev, he was on the verge of a very productive season. Eric Gentry finished last season 6th on the team in tackles with 33 tackles. He was, I think, 3rd in tackles for loss. No, he led the team in tackles for loss, so 6.5 tackles for loss last season. And he was tied for 3rd in sacks. It was sacks, he was 3rd. Played 5 games. He was on the verge of a monster season last year for USC, and they got hurt. But that's kind of the big thing for Eric Gentry is just being able to stay healthy has been an issue for him. 2 tackles for loss against LSU, 1.5 against Utah State, 3 against Michigan. He was on the verge of a big season. He's my sleeper because I just don't know where he's going to be. Health-wise, how does he fit into the defense? As personnel-wise. Those are questions I have, and the fit is about the health. So that's an interesting one. But he's a guy that if he's healthy, he might be on my first team. If he would have been healthy all year, he might have been a first-team linebacker. I don't have him on my first or second team just because of the injuries. Another guy, Sean Brown from NC State. He's like a cookie cutter of like Kyle Lewis and Xavier Sorey and these guys 6'1", 215. Very active player, flies around the ball. Just undersized. You can run at him more than you can run at the Pitt kids. And that's one of the big differences is those kids are hard to run at because they're so fast and explosive and they're taught very well how to block destruction very well. The other kids are more trying to run around you. And that I think impacts it. Where the Pitt kids will slam in, they'll try to get to like outside of you, but they do it with good technique. They'll like crash right outside of you and force you back to somebody else. These other kids will kind of like loop around you. Now all of a sudden this big hole opens up. So there's some of those issues. But, man, there's a lot of athleticism at linebacker on Notre Dame's schedule this year.
Yep. The only other player that I had on my second team was he's another kid from Boise State, Marco Notarini. He's a 6'3", 240-pound linebacker. He was very active, 60 total tackles last year, 33 solos. He had more solo tackles than assisted tackles. He had 3.5 sacks. He was, let me see where I can find it. I had it up, but he was 6th on the team, in tackles for a loss at 7.5. So he's somebody, he's taller. He's a little bit longer. And I liked his production, so I put him on my second team. But, yeah, they have a lot of linebackers that they're playing this season that they're very rangy. Very rangy.
I wish Andrew Simpson would have stayed at Boise.
Mm-hmm.
Because that would have been a fun front seven to watch this year, even more so if he would have stayed at Boise.
Yeah.
But Marco was, in my opinion, a better all-around player last year. I think Andrew Sampson was more of that impact downhill, more tackles for loss. But I think Marco is the better all-around player as sort
Agreed.
of like in the middle of that defense.
Yep.
So it's good. It's a solid linebacker room. Let's talk safety, Trev. Safety position. You and I at safety and corner have the same 4. So let's dive into that. Safety, Kamari Ramsey from USC. This is, I think, year 3 for him in this defense because he was also with Danton Lynn for a year at UCLA, followed him over to USC, had a good first season. I think Kamari Ramsey's play was not as good as I thought it was going to be. And honestly, Trev, I think a big part of it was just what was around him. I think he's someone who really struggled with how out of position everybody else was always all the time, that he then started to try to play a little bit of hero ball as the season went on, and that got him into some trouble. But overall, he's a good football player. 10 tackles against Penn State. He had 8 tackles against Notre Dame. He had just active player, downhill player. He's okay in coverage, but he's more of a downhill, impact the run game, play the middle of the field. And when I mean middle of the field, I mean coming down middle of the field, kind of robbing downhill. He'll play some over the top a little bit, but not a ton. He's a good football player, good safety. I think he'll have a much better year 2 at USC than he did year 1. But even year 1, he was still a good football player for USC. He still finished, 3rd on the team in tackles. He was 2nd on the team in solo tackles. He was his 5.5 tackles for loss was 2nd on the defense. So he was a good football player for them last season, and I think he'll be even better this season now that he has a little bit more time. 5 pass breakups, 1 pick last season. But you're bringing Kamari Ramsey in to be a run stopper and a thumper. You're not bringing him in here to cover and be. He's not Xavier Watts. They're very different players.
Yeah,
he's more. His role is more like kind of what Malachi Starks did for Georgia. Not that they're the same player. I'm saying role. He's going to come downhill and make a lot of plays. I think that's he's the top safety on the board for me.
Yep, I'm with you. The other safety that we have on the board, because we have the same 4 between safeties and corners, is Dalton Brooks, safety from Texas A&M. He was the guy that got ejected from the Notre Dame Texas A&M game for that targeting call against Riley Leonard early in the first quarter. Was it like Notre Dame's first offensive drive? Yeah.
It was 3rd down. He had scrambled, picked up the first down, and then he went flying over him, hit him in the head, and he got ejected, gave him 15 more yards, and they ended up kicking a field goal.
Yep. And so he returns. He's going to be back, rounding out Texas A&M's defensive backfield. Last season, finished year with 59 tackles, 38 solo tackles. He is also a little bit more of the come downhill player. He had 1 interception. He had 2 passes defended last season. And so he's definitely more of an alley safety than what he is like a Xavier Watts coverage safety. But he's a good player. He has decent size. He's 6 foot. He's 195, not crazy long. I mean, I also have a very skewed lens of how big a safety room should be because of what's in South Bend. I'm like, I'm 6 foot tall safety. Okay, bro, cool. That's what's so tough about it. But, Dalton Brooks, for me, Brian, I don't know if you had this issue either, but the secondaries as a whole, I had a tough time just coming up with safeties in general. And that was tough. I don't want to make it sound like Dalton Brooks was just kind of like the shiniest of the duds, because he is a good football player. But safeties as a whole, I had a tough time putting together this list.
I did. Well, a couple reasons why. There's a lot of new guys. So there's a lot of teams that have either transfer players or teams that have just new starters, just guys that didn't start for them last year, or transfers from smaller levels. So that, I think that's part of it too. There's a guy, for example, transferred from one team on the schedule to another. And that's Bishop Fitzgerald, who transferred from NC State to USC. He's a guy I looked at. But there's BC has 2 returning starters that were good football players last year. Carter Davis being one of them, who was a freshman last year, who I liked a lot. He's on my second team. But yeah, there's a lot of teams, Trevor, that have just new starters. And so it's tougher to project how guys are going to be because, honestly, my first, second, and third team could have just been the 2 guys from BC, the 2 guys from USC, and the 2 guys from Texas A&M, because Bryce Anderson's a guy from A&M, another guy that I considered for my list. So, those 3 teams have good safety situations. After that,
Yep.
there's a lot of questions. Of questions about those positions. I mean, you've got Deuce Robinson. Goodness gracious. You have Deuce Chestnut coming back to Syracuse. He was good last year, but at LSU, he was not as good because I think he's more built for that level. He was another guy that I considered. He was the only non-USC, Texas A&M, or BC safety that I really put a lot of thought into. I mean, Miami's going to have brand new safeties this year, and there's a lot of teams in that similar situation. So those are the guys that I saw that really popped up. BC's duo of Carter Davis and KP Price is very interesting. But A&M's duo is the one that I like. The thing I like about those 2 is they played together last year.
Yeah.
Where, Kamari Ramsey is going to be playing next to Bishop Fitzgerald, who is a good football player for NC State last year. Pretty good football player, but he's in a new system and you've got things to learn about him. So, yeah, it was a challenge, Trevor, really just coming up with who to consider for this list, and there was a lot of projection from some of those guys, but that made it a little bit challenging. What I do like is I do think that the Fitzgerald kid from NC State's a little bit more of a cover player,
sure,
for USC, whereas Achille Arnold and Kamari Ramsey were kind of the same guy. I think this gives them a little bit of a different type of player on the back end, which I think will help their defense. It's just how quickly can he get caught up in their system.
Totally. Yeah, no, absolutely. Another guy that I had, he was on my second team, safety from Boise State, Ty Benefield. He's a 6'2" kid. He's 200 pounds. He was, I think he was either a true sophomore last year. I don't remember off the top of my head. But he was a younger player, finished the season with 82 total tackles. He had 59 solo tackles. He had 2 picks, ended the year with 3 passes defended. He returns to their defensive backfield. So he's another safety that I'm going to have my eye on. And he's another one of those guys. He's a group of 5 guy, but in the bigger moments of last season, that's where he played the best, which is something that I take into consideration. He had 6 total tackles against Oregon. He had 9 total tackles, 6 solo tackles against Penn State. He had 8 total tackles against UNLV in the conference championship game. So he's somebody that's a pretty decent player.
What hurt him with me, Trevor, is he was good against the run against Oregon and Penn State, but he really struggled athletically in coverage in those 2 games. And that's fair. That's why he's not on our, that's why he's not on your first team. Because with the numbers he had last year, he should be a first team player if we're just looking at numbers. I mean, led Boise in tackles, and I mean, in it by a decent amount. If I remember correctly, he had 82. And let me look at it. Yeah, their next best guy had 68. So I mean, but it was that issue where I don't know that you put you put the D end, you put Feely, you put some of these guys, you put the tight end at Notre Dame, at USC, they can play. I think Benefield is more of that guy. I think if you put like Eli Heidenreich in a spread offense where he's just a slot receiver, I think he's really good. My thing with Ty is I don't know how well he would handle the athletic part of playing against Power 4 schools.
Yeah,
but
that's
as
totally
a run
fair.
Defender, he's a pretty good football player. He's a guy that I'd say if he came to Notre Dame, hey, can you get him down and play him at Rover?
Sure.
Where he can just be more of a run defender. Because to your point, he was good in those games as far as coming down and being a guy that could tackle. That's why the tackle numbers were what they were. I just thought he struggled at coverage.
And to your point, that's what kept him off of my first team.
Yeah.
It was just that factor there. So,
yeah.
Yep.
Corner, Trev, we had the same ones. I think this might be the best DB on the board that Notre Dame's going to face this year. My first corner is Will Lee from Texas A&M. I thought he had a pretty good first season at Texas A&M. You're going to have some of your first year in a system issues. And I thought that was true at time. I just think overall, sometimes the defense as a whole just played very inconsistent for Texas A&M. But I think I like him. I like Will Lee's big, tall guy, 6'3". Looks a lot like Cam Hart with dreads. It just physically looks a lot like Cam Hart did. Even on the play where he got beat by Bo Collins, he was in great coverage. It just was a great ball and a great catch. And just sometimes it's like, hey, you did your job. It's just that guy next to you just kind of, he's a pretty good player. So I thought Will had a good, solid first year at Texas A&M. I think he's going to be even better this year. I mean, if you look at his PFF numbers, gave up some big plays, but he held opponents to less than 50% completion rate. Got targeted 53 times, only gave up 25 completions. That's a good number for me. He actually had a much better completion rate allowed at A&M last year than he did at Kansas State. So I think in that regard, he was pretty good. He just has to limit giving up the big plays. Gave up a big play to Bowling Green, gave up a big play to South Carolina, gave up a big play in the game against Texas at the end of the year. That's where Will Lee's going to have to get better in that regard. If he can limit the big plays, he's an outstanding corner.
Yeah.
In a really probably the best secondary Notre Dame's going to face this year, as of right now, is A&M, and I think he's their best corner. He's their best defensive back, in my opinion. Yep. There's a bit of a drop-off for me after him and everybody else.
Yeah, we see that the same.
But I do like Colin Wright. I think Colin Wright's issue is his numbers last year in coverage for PFF were not great. But if you watch the film, there's good film there. He just had to cover a long time. Because if David Bailey wasn't on the field, they didn't really have anybody who could get after the quarterback. Like that was kind of the issue that Stanford had last year. And they put him in some really tough matchups from the standpoint of not just who he's matched up against and how long he had to cover, but just how they used him. And honestly, I didn't love how they used him, but I like Colin Wright as a corner. He's tall, long kid, smart, not an elite athlete, but he's a good football player. If he had better talent around him, I think he'd be even more effective and more productive. So he was my first team corner. I think he's a really good football player.
He's one of the people that I'm surprised stayed at Stanford, because I do think if you surrounded him with better talent, he's a good corner. I'm shocked that he
had to be teams going out, and he's experienced. He's played 2 years. He's a 2-year starter at Stanford.
Yeah,
I was surprised by that. Like, you look at his numbers, he gave up 6 touchdowns last year. Again, his team around him was really bad.
Yeah,
it really was. But he had 3 interceptions, 5 breakups. He's a good football player. I like him. If Notre Dame needed a veteran guy and he wanted to come, I'd take him in a heartbeat. Again, I don't know they'd start over the 2 kids they have, and I guess I'm kind of giving away a little bit of my deal there. But I think he's a good football player. He's the only kid for Stanford that I considered for either one of these teams.
Oh God, yeah.
Just because they're all gone. All the kids I liked are gone. But he's a good football player.
Agreed.
Second team, USC's got a pretty solid transfer coming in at corner. They have a young man named DJ Harvey who transferred in from there.
San Jose State.
Yeah. Had some issues against late in the year in a couple games, but overall, very steady corner. Watched him on film, about 5'11", $190. Not a little tight, runs well, but he's very smart. He's tough. He's competitive. There's a play against, I think it was Stanford. They ran a bubble screen. He blows the cornerback up and then blows up the guy in the backfield. Just a really impressive play. Watched him on film. Nothing like earth-shattering, oh my gosh, future first-round pick. But he's a good, steady, veteran, smart football player that I think is going to be a good pickup for USC. You don't want him covering him all day because he doesn't have elite speed and he's a little bit tight in his transitions. But he's a smart, strong, fundamentally sound kid that'll come up and smack you. So I like DJ Harvey. That was a good pickup for USC. He's one of my second-team corners.
Agreed. He was one of my second-team corners as well. And I believe we had first and second team the same here because my other second-team corner was Des Ricks.
No, we didn't have that one.
No? Okay. I had Des Ricks on there, and he's one of those that, again, it's a little bit more projection. If the light bulb can turn on for him because he was a highly rated recruit, he does have the athleticism. He has the size. I mean, he's a 6'1", 195-pound corner. Last season he had 20 tackles. He had a pick, 2 passes defended. So the raw stats are fine, but he didn't turn into the corner that they were expecting him to last season. And I paired that with my sleeper pick for them, because I didn't want to put like two people on the same. I also put Julian Humphrey on there, the Georgia transfer that also went to Texas A&M.
I could see one of those two being a breakout for them. Yeah.
So that's why I didn't want to put two of the same when I sent it over to you, like two names on the same. But
because they're battling for the same position. It's like they're both not going to start. Like one will play, they'll both play, but only one of them's going to start.
Mm-hmm. So
Des Ricks better step up, or he might get beat out by Julian Humphrey.
100%.
Like, there's
100%. And the only reason why I put Des Ricks in there is because he was the starter at Texas A&M last year. Julian Humphrey's the guy coming in. Now, I put both of them on my list. I just put Julian Humphrey as a sleeper because he is the transfer in. But if Texas A&M can get one of them to unlock what their potential is going to be, I think they're going to have a really good cornerback tandem.
And if we're looking at it from their standpoint, I have to think that the presence of each other should you hope, if you're A&M, you hope that them competing against each other forces at least one of them to really raise his level of play. If not both, that's what you hope.
Especially because Des Ricks didn't enter the spring portal.
Right.
Like that speaks volumes to me. Julian Humphrey came in the winter portal.
Yeah.
And so that to me is like, okay, like they're either working to get themselves better or they know there's going to be some sort of rotation between the two of them, but that one's going to be an interesting matchup to watch.
Yeah. You know, I've got Devin Marshall is my second team guy from NC State. He's a really good cornerback as well. I really like Devin Marshall. The sleeper for me is Xavier Lucas from Miami. I watched film of him at Wisconsin, and he's good. He's tall. He's like 6'2". He's physical. He's pretty long. He's a decent athlete. There's just something about he just doesn't blow me away. But he's young though, so there's some tools to work with. But he gets a lot of hype for being a big time pickup, and I see some good film of him. But I watched him against Nebraska, and he struggled off the line. Yeah, he was getting beat on top ends consistently in that game. I just wasn't blown away by him. But there's some tools to work with. If they can coach him up and get him going, I think he could fit that system pretty well and be a good corner for them. But he was my sleeper pick for corner.
I like that.
Just real quick, our specialist, I had Randy Bond at Texas A&M as my kicker. I had Caleb Junko from Pitt as my punter. Who was your kicker and punter?
It's Randy Bond and Caleb Junko.
Okay. My kick returner was Keelan Martin, who's one of the best kick returners in the country. He was he didn't do a whole lot at BYU as a receiver. Like 300 some yards last year, but he's a dynamic kick returner. And my punt returner is Desmond Reed, who I think might be the best punt returner in college football. Desmond Reed's an outstanding returner. Those are that was probably the two easiest picks I had at any position, was except for maybe D end and offensive tackle. Probably my easiest one was the two returners, because they are among the best in all of college football at what they do.
Fair enough.
Now, Trev, those are your returners as well, correct?
No, for my returners, I had Desmond Reed, a punt returner. I put Kenny Johnson from Pitt at kick returner. Mm-hmm. Literally, that's just a lack of due diligence on my end. I completely didn't see the special teams before I sent over the list for you. And so I just went to yards and was like, Kenny Johnson has a lot of return yards so that's
all good. You're like, dang it, Brian, I didn't want you to ask me that. Let's include Notre Dame in this conversation as we wrap up, Trev. I had a tough one. I had a tough time with this one. Well, I had a tough time with the front. Let's go linebacker first. My linebacker room with Notre Dame players included. I kept Kyle Lewis and I kept Torian York, but I put Drake Bowen as my third linebacker. I think Kingston Villamasa is more talented than anybody else on that list, especially Torian York, but I got to see him start first before I can put him into there. Jaden Alsbury could maybe be that guy. I just need to know who's going to start opposite Drake Bowen first, and then whoever dominates the snaps could end up being a player that factors in here first or second team, but I just don't know who that player is going to be yet. So it's kind of like a Notre Dame defender to be named later will also be on my second team. Whoever kind of takes control of that like Jack was the number one linebacker last year, Drake was number two, and then there was kind of everybody else. Drake's going to be number one this year. Who steps into that number two role? Whoever that is will be a second teamer, if not a first teamer this year. And then my secondary is littered with Notre Dame players. I have every returning Notre Dame starter on my first team defense. I have Kamari Ramsey at safety still from USC, but I took Adon Schuler over Dalton Brooks. That's a very easy one for me. Adon Schuler, in my opinion, is better than any safety that Notre Dame is going to face this year. I think he is the best safety on this board. And then Kamari Ramsey's number 2. And I took Leonard Moore as a no-brainer. I mean, he's the best corner in college football, in my opinion, at least one of. And then Christian Gray I have on my first team as well. I like Will Lee a lot. I watched those two guys play against each other in the opener last year, and Christian Gray was a better player. Now, Christian had some issues later in the year in a couple of games. Had a couple, and then, Navy had a couple bad snaps against Navy and had some issues with Malachi Fields, as everybody else did last year. And then, of course, we know what happened against USC. But I still think Christian Gray is an outstanding corner based on what he was last year. And then if we're doing projection, which we are doing with a lot of positions, I think Christian Gray is going to be outstanding this year. So I had Adon Schuler and Kamari Ramsey at safety, and then Leonard Moore and Christian Gray were my 2 corners. So I went with those 3. Let's talk back 7 first, Trev, and then I'm going to get into some of my difficulties with the front.
Yeah, I went ahead and put, for my list, I put Kingston in on my second team in place of Marco Notarini from Boise State, because they're used very similarly, if I'm being honest. And size-wise, they're also very similar. Marco's a 6'3", 240-pound kid. Kingston's a 6'3", 235 to 240-pound kid. I know he dropped some weight. So I went ahead and put him in there as well, because even though he's not going to there's a chance he might not be the proclaimed starter, I think his impact within the rotation is going to be big enough that I'm willing to put him on my second team there. And then everything else we have is as the same.
Let's talk about the front, because I had a tough time with this one, because I don't know who for Notre Dame is going to step into some of these roles. My starting defensive ends don't change because there's far more proven players. By the end of the year, could Bryce Young or Josh Burnham or Boubacar be there? Sure. But Boubacar's coming off of an injury, and Bryce and Josh have a lot to prove over a guy that had 15.5 tackles for loss for a playoff team last year in Jaden Bergen-Morgan from Boise State. And then, of course, Ruben Bain is a big-time player as well. And even his production last year still better than what Notre Dame's ends were in his down year. Second team-wise, I'm comfortable with Cassius Howe still being on that list, but I think a Notre Dame end is going to fit there in that second spot, but I don't know who that's going to be. It's going to be one of Josh Burnham, Bryce Young, or Boubacar Traore. And it just comes down to health. If you were to tell me, Brian, I went to the end of the year, I found a time machine, it allowed me to go to the end of the year, and the only number I could see is that Boubacar played over 400 snaps and didn't miss any games. I'm like, all right, cool, Boubacar's on my second team. Like, I'd be totally fine with that. I could see Bryce Young being that spot as well, and Josh Burnham even taking that spot. So I don't know which one I want to go with, Trevor, but one of those defensive ends will replace Quintavious Hutchins on my second team list. What say you?
No, that's totally fair. You and I had the same kind of battle with that, because I don't know who it will be, because there's question marks around all of them. Will Josh Burnham become a more complete defensive end, or still be known more as a run defender? Will Bryce Young take that jump from freshman to sophomore year and kind of start to play to what the 6'7", 260-pound potential is? And is Boubacar going to come back healthy? What is that going to look like too? So I did also take Quintavious off my list as well, but I just left it as like Notre Dame player, because I just don't know who it's going to be. But it would not shock me if it's any one of them. And honestly, I'd go as far to say it wouldn't surprise me if it was 2 of the 3. Like, if you were to tell me, again, time machine, you go back, or you go forward to the end of the season. If you would have told me that Boubacar and Bryce Young had a breakout season, or Josh Burnham and Boubacar did, or Burnham and Bryce Young did, it wouldn't surprise me. It wouldn't. But yeah, we had the same issue there.
D tackle is also an issue, because I actually don't have any Notre Dame players there. Because again, I don't know what the rotation is going to look like. I think Gabriel Rubio is a more talented player than anybody on that list. I think that Jason Onye could have the kind of breakout season that gets him on the first team, but how can I possibly put a guy that only played 6 games last year, only had 3 tackles for loss on the list over some of those other guys? I can't justify it. The talent's there, but like if we're being like no one else that doesn't follow Notre Dame is going to look at Jason Onye's film or production and say, "Oh yeah, put him on your first team." Because they're going to say, "Boy, that kid flashed. He looked really good in a couple of those games last year, but then he just went away. What happened?" And he never really did anything the year before. He had 1.5 tackles for loss and 1.5 sacks last year, seven tackles in 5 games. That's not the kind of production, even though the film was good, to say he's going to be first or second team. Would it shock me if at the end of the year, Jason Onye is better than Landon Robinson or Brandon Cleveland or Braxton Fielder or Cameron Ball? No, not at all. But I just couldn't put him on there. Jared Dawson's a guy that I thought about because his production actually last year was good enough to be on there over some of these guys. But again, where is he going to be on the Notre Dame rotation? So I had a hard time. I ended up not putting anybody on there, Trevor, and because I just don't know which Notre Dame player is going to break out. And that's something that's a little bit concerning looking at the season, but also something that can excite you because you are talking about, is it going to be Rubio? Is it going to be Onye? Is it going to be Heinisch? Is it going to be Dawson? Is it going to be Armo Mukum? Is it going to be Sean Sevillano? Like there's a lot of guys there that are potential fits to be those breakout player or players. So that's what made it a challenge for me to put any of those Notre Dame D tackles on there. I ended up not putting any of them on there just because they all have so much to prove compared to what some of these other players are, even though I think their natural talent and or their potential is greater. But Jason Onye, we talked about the Cameron Ball kid, and he didn't have great production last year and didn't really completely blow us away. Well, his production last year, 4.5 tackles for loss, 4 tackles for loss, and 1.5 sacks, basically is the combined production of Gabriel Rubio and Jason Onye last year. So they got to prove it to me.
Yep.
But talent-wise, those guys belong in this conversation, but they've got to prove it to me.
Well, I think that for the defensive tackle position, I think that's going to be the most subject to change early in the season. Some of the other things I need to see play out over the course of the season, but when I look at Gabe Rubio and when I look at Jason Onye, it's a little bit different than Bryce Young. Because with Bryce Young, it's like you were very young last year. With Gabe Rubio and Jason Onye, like they're in, like for lack of better terms, they're veterans. They've been with the Notre Dame football program for a while. Now it's like, can you just do it for a whole season? But with Bryce, like you're so young, can you hone in your abilities over the course of the season? But on the interior defensive line, it wouldn't shock me if a quarter and a half into the season, we're having those discussions of like, okay, like Rubio and or Onye and or insert defensive tackle here is now on that list.
Agree. So that's the defensive list, Trev. We had 4 Notre Dame guys on that list on offense and defense. Nobody else had that many. If you look at my defensive team, I had 3 guys from Texas A&M on my list. I had 2 guys from Pitt. And then I had 1 from Boise, 1 from Miami, 1 from Navy, 1 from NC State, 1 from USC, 1 from Stanford. So Texas A&M, and you want to know why I think Texas A&M is going to be Notre Dame's best opponent, I had 6 A&M players on my first and second team.
Yeah.
3 offense, 3 defense. I had Le'Veon Moss, Kevin Concepcion, Armaj Reed Adams. I thought about replacing him with Chase Pasantis, both also from A&M. And then I had defensively, I had Will Lee, Dalton Brooks in the secondary, and then Torian York, a linebacker. But then there's also guys in the second team. I have Chase Pasantis in the second team. I have Trey Zune on the second team. You talked about the potential of an Amari Daniels, if he gets enough touches, could be a guy in that conversation. I do have Scooby Williams on the second team. I do have Cassius Howell on the second team. You have Des Ricks on the second team. So that's why when you watch the film, those are just the most talented players. It's not, they're SE. It's just watch the film.
Yeah.
That's what they are. So that's why I think my A&M is better, is the tougher opponent. Miami could end up being really good, but Miami's got a lot of ifs. If this, if that on their team, that you're going to need certain guys to step up and perform, where A&M is kind of got a lot of those guys are coming back. They've already proven it to a degree. And that's why I think those 2 things are going to be tougher. Whereas Miami, maybe week 4, week 5, week 6, this becomes a problem for people the guys they have. But in game one, how much of those new secondary guys are going to be there in game one? You look at linebacker, a guy that that we could have considered that we'll talk about for the all linebacker team is if Mohamed Traore was not injured last season. Because if you look at what he did at Rutgers 2 years ago, that was a good football player. 93 tackles, 9.5 tackles for loss, 4.5 sacks. But he missed all of last year and didn't commit to Miami till like May
9th.
So it's like, okay, where's he at health-wise? Where's he at and fit in the system? I have no idea. So there's some projection there, and that's the issue with A&M, where I know what's going on at A&M at linebacker. I know what's going on at some other positions. And that's why I think A&M's the best, going to be the toughest opponent for Notre Dame in this 2025 season.
Yep, I'm with you. I had, between offense and defense, I think I had 11.
A&M guys on first and
second team.
Yep. Yeah, I had 6 first team and then 3, 4 on second team. So I had 10.
And that was before including Marcel Reed, Amari Daniels,
Yep.
So,
Trev, that is going to do it for our defensive breakdown. We're going to get into our Miami preview next. But before we do, folks, do us a favor. Hit that like button. Hit the subscribe button. Hit the notification bell. Share this podcast. Give us a 5-star review. We'd greatly appreciate that. And as always, the best way to support what we're doing at Irish Breakdown is to sign up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. So let's jump, Trevor, into our Miami preview. And so this is going to be kind of game ones of a 12 or show one of a 12 series bit we're going to do, where at the end of shows we're going to preview a Notre Dame opponent, because there's just so much that we want to get into this year that it's impossible to just kind of do these things as individual shows. So we're going to kind of put these in as part of, at the end of shows. And today I thought it'd be great to kick it off with our all opponent team, all of our opponent team, and then go right into, now it's time to look at the schedule individually. And we're going to first preview the Notre Dame Miami game, which is going to be played on August 31st. That is a Sunday. It's going to be a night game, and it's going to pit what will likely be 2 top 25 teams, if not 2 top 10 teams, based on some people's preseason projections. But I'm confident in saying it's going to be 2 top 25 teams. And this is a big game for both teams. Obviously, for Notre Dame, it's a game where you're looking to kick your season off with a big win as you look to make another run for the national championship game. But for Miami, and our focus is going to be on looking at it from the Miami standpoint, just not looking at it from their standpoint, but just previewing Miami, not so much the matchup against Notre Dame, but just their team. This is a big year for Mario Cristobal. You're going into year 4 as a coach. You took a step forward as a program last year. You went 10-3. They go 11-2 if they don't pull Cam Ward at halftime of that game. You went 5-7 in year 1, 7-6 in year 2, and you took a nice little jump in year 3 to go 10-3. First 2 years, very disappointing. Last year, a much better season. But even within the improved success, you had a big win at Florida. There were not a lot of great wins last year outside of, 2 pretty good ones at Florida and at Louisville. The Louisville game was especially a really good win because Louisville was playing good football at the time. But, the win over Florida State didn't mean a whole lot. You beat a Duke team that won 9 games, but wasn't that great of a team. You needed to have a comeback to beat a mediocre Virginia Tech team at home. You needed a crazy comeback on the road to beat a very mediocre Cal team. You just didn't beat a lot of good teams. And then late in the year, Georgia Tech beat you again, and then you blew a big lead against Syracuse, which knocked you out of the playoff. So even within the improvement, there's still a little bit of a sour taste in my mouth about how their season went. And now you're going into year 4. It's time to say, okay, it's time to truly kick that door down and say the U is back. And that's the expectation. They're spending a lot of money on the roster. They've got some talented players coming back. The question is going to be, is Miami capable of doing that? But I do think that if you're Mario Cristobal, if you're not in playoff contention again in November, I think there's going to be some questions about where this program is going under him.
Yeah, he's definitely become, over the course of the offseason, definitely more of a polarizing coach for me because Miami's gaining a lot of hype and momentum. I don't know how much of that is because of what they did offensively last year because you go back and you look at some of the opponents they beat. The win at Florida was really impressive. It was early in the season. Florida, you could make the argument Florida didn't have its feet under them, but you still went into the swamp and you beat Florida 41-17 or something. It was not close. Yeah, and then to beat Louisville, in a game where your defense gives up 45 points and you're still able to pull out a victory, it's also impressive. But then you have the Virginia Tech game, you have the Cal game. The Duke game was not as lopsided as what the final score indicated. So it was a lot of that for Miami. It was a lot of those games where, it was either too close to call at the end and, you had some help from some outside factors, call it. And then you also had some situations where it's like, I don't know if you guys should have won that game.
Mm-hmm.
Final score wasn't as indicative of how the game actually went down.
The Duke game is especially that because they ended up winning big, but it was they were losing for a chunk of that game to Duke.
Mm-hmm.
And Duke was a good football team, but if you're a team that's trying to win a championship, you can have a game like that. Heck, Michigan beat 8-5. Michigan beat Ohio State. 8-5 Northern Illinois beat Notre Dame. You have those games, but for Miami, there's just too many of those games for them last season.
Yep.
But that's kind of how Notre Dame's year 3 went under Marcus Freeman, or year 2 went under Marcus Freeman. 10-3 record, but just kind of left a bad taste in your mouth because of the way you lost some games. And so can Miami take that next step as a program is the big question for Mario Cristobal. The one thing has to be true is I don't think you can take a step back. And that's the thing you have to avoid. And you have to, what we're going to find out this year was Miami's success last season built on Mario Cristobal growing the program, or was it because of just how good Cam Ward was? I tend to think it was because of how good Cam Ward was, but we're going to find that out. And look, I don't know what you think of Carson Beck, but him and Cam Ward are two very different players.
Yeah.
And Cam Ward is sort of the take a game over, do a lot of different things, where Carson Beck is not that. Carson Beck can be really good if what's around him is really good. He's not an elevator as a quarterback. And that's, people look at his numbers and they talk about this and that. And I'm like, look who he was throwing to. Oh, his run game was bad last year. Well, okay, his run game was pretty good the year before, and he had Brock Bowers and he had Ladd McConkey, and he put up pretty good numbers, but he wasn't an elevator. He was a guy that was getting the ball where he needed to get to. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's different than what Miami had last year. They had an elevator. They had a guy that made everyone around them better. They lose a lot from last year. This is going to be the true test of how good of a coach Mario Cristobal is. And he's put a lot of blame on last year on the defense, and the defensive coordinator fired him after just 2 years. Now it's on you. You went out and made another hire coordinator, and we're going to see what he can do. Just diving a little bit into this series a little bit between Notre Dame and Miami. Notre Dame does hold a 17-8 17-8-1 all-time record against Miami. Miami won the most recent game, which was back in 2017, a 41-8 victory over the Irish. Notre Dame won 5 of the previous 6 matchups, and they beat Miami in 1988. Miami beat them in 1989. Notre Dame cost Miami a title in 88. Miami cost Notre Dame a title in 89. Notre Dame beat Miami in 1990, which also cost them a chance at a title. They did not play again for 20 years, and that was in the Sun Bowl in 2010, Brian Kelly's first season. Notre Dame won that game 33-17. Was not that close. It was 30-3 at one point in time. Michael Floyd just destroyed them. Harrison Smith destroyed them. Not a competitive game. Played again 2 years later, a game Notre Dame won 41-3 in Soldier Field. The Irish beat them in 2016, so that 4-8 year, that was one of the teams that Notre Dame beat. They had a big lead early. Miami came back. If you remember that fumble, C.J. Sanders fumbles the ball in the end zone. Miami recovers. And then I think it was Josh Adams had a big run late in that game to kind of get him back on top. I get that in the Virginia Tech game confused. I think it was the Miami game.
It was.
That Josh did that. And then, of course, Miami in 2017 just annihilated Notre Dame 41-8. So Notre Dame holds the all-time series in large part because they started off 1-1-1, and then from Notre Dame won, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 in a row up to 1980. Since 1981, Miami has won 7 and Notre Dame has won 6. Says one. So from 1980, Notre Dame has won 7, Miami's won 7. So the dominance is more of back of when Notre Dame was an elite program and Miami was kind of coming along. Miami started getting a lot better in the 80s. That's when Miami became the U. First started with Howard Schnellenberger, then Jimmy Johnson, and then Dennis Erickson, and so forth and so on. Notre Dame and Miami had a very intense rivalry in the 80s and into 1990. It's gone away for a while. The games that they've played recently have not either been one of the teams wasn't good, and only one of the 4 recent games is even close. And that was the year that Notre Dame won in a season where they went 4-8. This is going to be the first time in a long time, in my opinion, that both teams have had this much on the table. I don't know, like 2017, they were both ranked pretty high. I believe they were both in the top 10 in 2017, but Miami was a team that at that point in time had not really played anybody yet. They were a team that had a lot to prove at that point in time, and they ended up beating Notre Dame, which got a lot of people thinking they were going to be pretty good. I think they were 7th. Notre Dame was in the top 4, and then, of course, Miami goes out and I think loses their next 2 games after beating Notre Dame. So, yeah, they went out and lost to Virginia. They beat Virginia next week and then beat Pitt the next game after that. So they won 1 game after that, then lost to Pitt, then got killed by Clemson, then got beat by Wisconsin in the bowl game. And up to that point in time, they hadn't beaten a ranked team all year till Notre Dame. Embarrassing game for Notre Dame, as we remember. Big win for Miami, and this is, you've got a chance to exercise some demons. Here's a crazy stat for you, Trevor. Notre Dame and Miami have played each other at Miami a grand total of, let me count this up. It has been, so they played 2017, 1989, 1987, 1985, 1983, 1981, and then 1977. Notre Dame has not beaten Miami in Miami since 1977. So this is obviously a big opportunity for both teams. And for Miami, this is the kind of game you can win to get your latest "we're back" moment. You beat the defending, national runners-up, a rival, first game of the year, new quarterback. This is the kind of tone-setting game that Miami needs to. It's that signature win that I don't think Mario Cristobal really has yet.
Agreed.
And that's what's at stake for Miami in this game.
Yeah, it's a big game, no doubt about it. Very rarely, well, I guess I can't say very rarely. Feels like for the second season in a row, Notre Dame is kicking off, their season with playoff implications kind of being in the balance the first time they step foot on the field to begin the season. But, it will weigh heavily. For Miami, this is going to come down to, hey, what marquee win are you going to get under your belt to help propel your season? Whoever comes away winning this game, they're going to use it as the foundation for their season. For Miami, it's like, look, I know we don't leave the state of Florida until the month of November, but we're gonna use this Notre Dame win to propel us forward. And for Notre Dame, it's, hey, we got to win on a Sunday night in Miami. We got the bye week to rest up. We host Texas A&M at home. We're able to go 2-0 through that stretch. Our season is starting to look real favorable as long as they can stay focused week over week. So it's a big matchup. It's a big matchup week 1.
For Miami, if you can get that win, you've got Bethune-Cookman the next week. You've got South Florida the next week. You are a no-brainer top 10 team when Florida comes to town. So it is very much a season-defining opportunity for Miami. And as you get into your season expectations, it's not just about be 9-3 or better, but you've got to start getting some of those signature wins where you not only beat a rival, which they did. They beat both of their rivals last year. They beat Florida and Florida State last year, but neither of them were that good. Florida was, even by the end of the year, was a better team, but they were still an 8-5 football team. Florida State went 2-10. So you are going to need to prove that you get more of those marquee wins. I think the Louisville win was a very good win, but it's kind of like when Notre Dame beats Louisville, you're not going to get the national recognition that, like, nobody thought last year, like, okay, Notre Dame beat Louisville, they're back on track. Watch out, world. Notre Dame's going on a run. Like, we thought that, but nationally that wasn't the perception because it's not a name program. they need a win like this in order to really give Mario Cristobal the kind of boost that I think he wants to say, hey, look, we're back. Let's start getting some more people in here. So let's dive into, and I think that's the expectation for Miami this year. What's the expectation for Miami? Compete for an ACC championship, make a run to the playoffs. I don't think anybody should be expecting this Miami team to compete for a championship. They're not there yet. And there's a lot of things that Mario Cristobal still is looking to improve in the program. But I do think they're at the point now in year 4 that if you are that coach, year 4, with the money you're spending in the portal, should be that year where people should expect you to compete for the ACC title and then make a run to the playoff. I think that to me is what this team should be competing to do this season based on where they are in the program's development.
Yeah, it just summed up. They need to be in the conversation by Thanksgiving. In all 3 years of Mario Cristobal's tenure in Miami, they've just never been around it come Thanksgiving, unfortunately. I mean, they were even on the outside looking in this year because of the loss to Georgia Tech. And even then, before the loss to Georgia Tech, people were poking holes in some of the things that were going on. They were referencing the Cal game. They were referencing the
Virginia Tech game, right?
Exactly. And so be in the conversation in Thanksgiving. Don't be undefeated. You don't have to be, but give yourself a chance to fight for the ACC title because after Clemson,
that's what hurt them against Syracuse last year. Because if they don't lose that game, like if they don't lose to Syracuse, they're playing in the ACC title game.
Yeah.
And now you're competing for, we might have a shot to host, because when they went in to play Syracuse at that time, there were some questions about it, but they were still number 6 in the country. You win that game, win or lose the ACC title game, I think you're hosting.
Mm-hmm.
And then you lose that game. And that's the kind of losses that Mario Cristobal has had that have kind of derailed their seasons where you're like, how did you lose that game? You start off in 2023, they start off 4-0. They had that big win over Texas A&M, who was ranked at the time. And their other wins weren't big, but that A&M win was giving them a lot of cachet. They were unranked when they beat A&M, and then they jumped up to 22, beat Bethune-Cookman, jump up to 20, beat Temple 41-7, and then you lose at home in bizarre fashion to Georgia Tech. If you remember that game, not taking the knee, and it was just a bizarre game. And you got the next week and you lose at North Carolina. You think you right the ship because you beat Clemson, you beat Virginia, and then all of a sudden you get whooped at NC State, you get beat at Florida State in a competitive game. Like their next 2 games were respectable losses, losing at undefeated Florida State by a touchdown, losing at home to number 10 Louisville by a touchdown. You blow out Boston College. You're sitting there and you're 7-5. You got a chance to get a win over Rutgers in a bowl game, and you're thinking, dude, if we go 8-5, 3 of our losses are to top 15 teams. Carolina was ranked 12th when they beat us. Florida State was ranked 4th. Louisville was ranked 10th. You beat Clemson. You beat Texas A&M. You beat Rutgers in that bowl game, and all of a sudden there's some positive vibes going, and then they get beat by Rutgers. And that's the thing that's hurt Coach Cristobal is it just seems whenever they're on the verge of really turning the corner, they just have a bad loss or 2 that knocks them out. Last year was the same thing. Like you're starting to roll, because here's the thing is you can criticize them for, and we talked about this where, Miami, they haven't really beat anybody that impressed you in 2024, but you still thinking, hey, but you know what, Trev, they're finding ways to win. And isn't that part of program development is, okay, yeah, it wasn't pretty against Virginia Tech. It wasn't pretty against Cal. But past Miami teams lose both of those games. And that's where I felt like, okay, you're starting to turn the corner. But then you go and you beat Louisville on the road. And I'm thinking, okay, now they're rolling. You blow out Florida State. Yeah, the Duke game was ugly for a while, but you know what? Like they found a way to win, and they win by 22. Like that's what good teams do, Trev. That's the whole point. But then you go out there and you have that just ugly loss to Georgia Tech, and then you blow a huge lead to Syracuse and lose that game. Those are the things that Miami's got to stop doing. It's like what we talked about with Marcus Freeman going into last year at Notre Dame. You can't lose to Stanford. You can't lose to teams like Clemson, who wasn't that good. You can't lose to the Marshalls. We know you can go toe-to-toe with big top teams. We've seen you do that. But can you just avoid those what was that games? And that's what Miami's got to do this year under Mario Cristobal is avoid those what in the world was that losses. That's going to be the key for them this season. If they can do that, then I do think they go into they have a shot to play for the ACC title. And if they play for the ACC title, if they're good enough to get that far, then I think they're good enough to beat anybody, including Clemson. Meaning if they've played well enough to be there, then that tells me that they've maximized their talent. Some of the portal pickups were hits. Carson Beck is looking like he was in 2023. Your offensive line's big time. Your run game's big time. Your receivers have stepped up. Your defensive line's legit. They're not playing for the ACC title game if those things aren't true. You agree with that, Trev?
Probably, yeah.
Right. Otherwise, they're not there. So the point is, then if that's true, then you can beat a Clemson. I'm not saying I'm going to pick you to beat them, but you've got the talent to do so. I think that's what people are expecting from Miami this year, at least what they should be expecting from Miami this year, because, again, you're going into year 4, and resources are not your problem. Miami is more than willing to spend. And I'm not one of those people that whines about Miami buying players. That's the system. They're not breaking any rules, as far as I know. You can pay players now. They're using the resources they have. But when you do that, it's like what we talked about yesterday, Trevor. When you do that, people expect results.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And that's why Miami's become such a polarizing team. Just because you look at all the things that you just laid out, big picture, it's like this is the expectation for this team. My question is, and some other people's questions are, do they have the pieces for that? Maybe. But it's not going to look like what it did last year.
No.
That's going to be stuff that we'll dive into later. But
I don't care how it looks. If you're Miami, you just care that the results get there. And that's what's going to be interesting. So let's dive into more specifics about Miami, Trev, as we look in this. And we're going to begin with the offense. And you mentioned earlier, like, this is a reason why a lot of people are thinking that Miami is going to be a good football team, because last year, Miami offensively was a dynamic football team. These are how Notre Dame's opponents fared last year. And as you can see, Miami had the not only Notre Dame's best opponent. This isn't the ranking amongst Notre Dame, opponents. This is just nationally number 1 scoring offense in college football, number 1 last season in yards per game, number 3 last season in passing yards per game, and then they were number 31 in rushing yards per game, which is a pretty respectable number for a team that was 3rd in passing. Yep. And then they were also number 1 in yards per play. They were one of only 2 teams last year, along with Ole Miss, to be over 7 yards a play. You could count Ohio State if you round up. They were at 6.95, but they were just at 7 or above was Ole Miss and Miami. And the question is going to be, can you keep that going, or was that more of a Cam Ward infused results? Because if you look at 2023, they were a much different team, 31.5 points per game. That season, only 431.2 yards per game is still pretty good. 6.4 yards per play is still pretty solid, but they weren't anything like what they were last year. I don't think they're going to repeat last year's numbers, but you want to be closer to last year than what you were in 2023. And that's going to be the big challenge for Miami this year. To your point, Trev, it's going to be different. I think the way Miami is built, where their strengths are, where their areas of concern are, I think it's going to look a lot different. I don't think you're going to be a team that throws for 348 yards a game, but you could be a team that is much more effective running the ball. But the question is going to be, the first big question for Miami to me is, can the offense remain big time? Because if your defense improves, but your offense regresses, how much better are you as a team? And that's going to be the key. Can the offense maybe not score as much, not have as many yards, but can they be more efficient? Can they be more sound? I think there's room for them to be a touchdown less per game and, 60, 70 fewer yards per game, but be more efficient because they're limiting the turnovers. They're not so reliant on the big plays. They're controlling the clock better, which then protects the defense. I think those things are all aspects that are going to determine just how good the Miami offense is this year.
To me, it's going to come down to how Mario Cristobal handles Carson Beck. Some of the most successful seasons he's had as a head coach, Coach Cristobal has had a really good quarterback at the helm. At Oregon, he had Justin Herbert. Last year at Miami, he had Cam Ward, 2 top NFL caliber draft picks. Can you play to the strengths of your team? You do have you have a good offensive line unit. You have a good running back unit. Or are you going to make the mistake that Kirby Smart did at Georgia and be like, that's okay, we have Carson Beck. We can throw it 35 times a game. What is your identity going to be on offense? Are you going to lean into your strengths, or are you going to try to be the offense that you were last year with players that are not up to par as what they were in 2024?
Mm-hmm.
Carson Beck is not Cam Ward.
Mm-hmm.
CJ Daniels is not Xavier Restrepo. I'm sorry. So if you can play to the strengths of your team and give Carson Beck some run support, give him a run game to play behind, I think Miami's offense is going to be really good. Mm-hmm. But for me personally, you guys know I'm not high on Miami. I don't think I don't know. I don't have the faith in Coach Cristobal to do that. Or at least he hasn't shown me that he can. Now, mind you, argument on the opposite is the strength of the team last year was throwing the football, and that's what he leaned into.
But they built around what they were good at, and that's what I think makes Shannon Dawson a good coordinator. Is Shannon Dawson likes to throw the football, but Shannon Dawson is not someone who is like, we're going to throw the football no matter what. I think he'll lean into what makes them, like, what their strengths are. And to that point, this is what makes Miami such a different team last year. Because, like, yes, the yards were great. The yards per play were great, all those type of things. But Miami also had 16 turnovers last year in 13 games. Like you had, and the turnovers were bad. I mean, some of the turnovers against Cal were just like, dude, like I think he threw like one pick. It was a terrible pick, put him in a bad spot. You lose to Iowa State, turn the ball over 3 times. You have to get better protecting the football. What was a big reason why Virginia Tech was in that game? They lost a turnover battle 3-1. Like, those are the things that we're talking about. You're going to be a different team. And I think Carson Beck, if healthy, could put up big passing numbers if they had the same team they had last year. They don't. It's not just about losing Cam Ward. You lost your entire receiving core from last year. You lost your number 1, your number 2, your number 3, your number 4, your number 5, your number 6 leading pass catchers last year. Your top returning pass catcher from a yard standpoint is Elijah Lofton, who had 9 catches for 150 yards. Your top returning pass catcher from a catches standpoint is your running back, Mark Fletcher, who had 10 catches for 106 yards. So, to me, it's what are you good at? What are you strong at right now? And right now, Miami's strength is running the football. Last year, the run game was a complement to the pass game. The numbers were good still. 188 yards a game, 5.7 yards per play, and they didn't ask Cam Ward to run as much as he had at other places. It was more, his yards were more scrambling yards. And so, but you lose Damian Martinez, who had 1,000 yards rushing last year. You replace him with Mark Fletcher and Jordan Lyle, who last year combined for 1,007 yards and 13 touchdowns. So now you look at it and say, okay, what's the strength of this team? Last year was the quarterback and the wide receivers. The run game was a complement to the pass game. This year, I think you flip it. This year, I think the strength of your team needs to be the run game, and the pass game needs to complement it. Because you not only bring back Mark Fletcher, who was a former top recruit, if you remember correctly, was committed to Ohio State for a long time. Miami flipped him late in the process. I believe Jordan Lyle was also a one-time Ohio State commit. They're both talented young players. And they got Shamar Brown from who was a 1,000-yard rusher at North Dakota State last year. He's now there too. So you've got 3 good running backs, and you return the best right tackle in college football. You return Markel Belt left tackle, who's a big kid who rotated last year with Jalen Rivers. He had some good moments and some moments that weren't as strong. But he comes back. He's a year older. And now all of a sudden you look at your football team and you're saying, hey, look, we're a big offensive line for the most part. They got a couple guys. James Brockermeyer's like 295. But for the most part, they're a big offensive line. They are an experienced offensive line in certain spots. If they can get Cooper and Rodriguez kind of rolling. I know Cooper played a decent amount last year. They've got a shot to be a very physical, movement-based offensive line. They're going to need to get that going early in the season you don't want to ask Carson Beck to throw the ball 40 times a game when he's coming back from the injury he's coming back to. And we're going to talk about the receiving core in a second, Trevor. I think there's potential there. But you can't ask them to go into the first game of the year against one of the best secondaries in college football and say, okay, we're going to ask you, to your point, we're going to ask JoJo Trader to go be Xavier Restrepo or Isaiah Horton. We're going to ask, Ray Joseph to be Xavier Restrepo. I mean, you can't ask them to do that in the beginning of the year. They got to build to that, and that's where the run game is going to be so important. And if they can get that, you lost Jacoby George, who had 50 catches for over 700 yards. You lost Isaiah Horton to Bama, who had over 50 catches for 600 yards. You lost Elijah Arroyo, had over 35 catches for 590 yards. You lost Sam Brown, who had over 30 catches for 500 yards. There's some players there. CJ Daniels, solid player. I don't know that he's going to be much better than he was at LSU. Ray Joseph had a big spring game. JoJo Trader had a big spring game. They went to the portal, got a couple kids. Nikar comes back. I'm high on Nikar. Malachi Toney, I think, had 100 yards in the spring game. But here's where it's at. Are you really going to want to ask those guys to be those type of players in game 1 against a team like Notre Dame, or even in game 4 against a team like Florida, without saying, no, we're going to be more run-oriented, and then we're going to grow the pass game as the season goes on? That's going to be the question.
Yeah, absolutely. And all encompassing. I mean, my biggest grief with Miami is the ifs. There's a lot that has to play out for them to reach what their potential is. And what we said their potential is being in the hunt to be in the playoff discussion, being in the conversation of, playing for the ACC championship. And I think that's what's so tough about the Miami situation is, if they can lean more into the run and some of their offensive line continue to pan out, and if all of these very inexperienced wide receivers pan out, and if they don't have to ask Carson Beck to do too much, and if their defense plays better than what it was last year, then they're going to be good. And it's like, that is a bunch of ifs, man.
This is where you and I disagree a little bit on Miami, because everybody has ifs this time of the year. Everybody.
Agreed.
And the question is going to be, where are the ifs? That's what's the bigger question mark. I've always been someone who says, I don't care if there's a lot of ifs at receiver as far as lack of experience. Where I get concerned about lack of experience is quarterback and offensive line. Because there's certain positions where, if you just look around college football, there are certain positions where youth can figure it out a lot easier. Receivers one where being young a receiver doesn't hurt teams as much as being young on the offensive line, or being young at quarterback, or having an injury at quarterback. Now, being young at running back doesn't matter as much. Like, I think you and I would say that if Notre Dame had to go into a game with Aeneas Williams, Kedron Young, and Nolan James playing running back behind that line, they're going to be fine. Now, if we were talking about, okay, they're going into a game and they've got Will Black and Gerby Lambert and, Owen Strebig as the starting offensive line, much bigger concern.
Sure.
And so that's the thing for me is, yeah, there's a lot of ifs, but that's just college football now. The question for Miami is, they don't have a track record yet of saying that they can lose that many players and reload at the position. That's the bigger question mark. But I think when you look at it, I think there is talent there. It's just, can they get it rolling? And that's why the run game is so important, because I think Miami's receiving corps is going to be fine eventually. The question is, can they do enough to protect it early in the season with the run game to give it the time it needs? Because if you're going to say, hey, we're going to put all this on Carson Beck's shoulders and all on JoJo Trader and Ray Joseph and Malachi Toney and CJ Daniels' shoulders in game 1 against Notre Dame, I don't know how that's going to go. I'll feel a lot better about doing that in game 6 against Louisville, or even game 5 against Florida State. That's my question. I think everybody's got ifs right now. And in Miami's case, the good news for them is their ifs are at positions you're much more comfortable with there being ifs. Secondary, receiver, because those are positions where I think transitions can be made smoother. Where they don't have a lot of ifs, other than health, is the lines. And I think that's the difference between you and I you not having Miami ranked, and I do have Miami ranked. The question is going to be, are they good enough in the trenches to carry the day until the younger, talented players at the skill position can step up? I think when young players get in trouble, Trev, is when you ask too much of them early on. That's my fear with those ifs is my big if you have to rely on those guys right away to beat a team like Notre Dame, then you might be in trouble. But you might be able to rely on them more to beat Pitt in November or Virginia Tech in November. That's what it is for me. And that's why it's so important that their offensive line does play, because it's not a given their offensive line is going to be elite. It's just got the potential to be so. And that's really the big question for me.
Sure. It's definitely fair to, like, all teams absolutely have ifs. And I'm also not saying that I think Miami's ifs are a bunch of bums either. I don't think that at all. I'm not saying that you are saying that I'm saying that. But where I have trouble, and this is partially because last season from them just left such a bad taste in my mouth, is at a lot of those positions you didn't have ifs. And you still didn't make the playoffs, and you still didn't make the ACC championship game, and you still fell apart in November. And so it's hard for me to picture that now this team potentially could go farther than what last year's team could be. That's where I have trouble, is because you lose all that production. And your secondary, you lost 4 players in the secondary that all played 150 snaps. I'm okay plugging in young players in the secondary or inexperienced players in the secondary if it's not the whole secondary.
Right.
Like I was okay with Leonard Moore stepping in because he was surrounded by Christian Gray and Xavier Watson and Don Schuler. But when you plug in 2 experienced corners and an experienced safety, that's when I tend to have more of the issues instead of
the corners they're playing, though, aren't in it. Well, we'll get to the defense in a little bit, but the corners they're putting in aren't inexperienced. They just haven't played in Miami
or together. Like that
Right.
Those goes into my ifs.
I get that.
Like there's no chemistry. There's no.
But that's true for a lot of teams that they're going to play too. That's sort of where I'm getting at. But I want to focus more on the Miami part. Let's finish up with their offense. The question is going to be is to your point, is can they adjust? Can they go from a team that was so reliant on the pass, and then your run game is a complement, to a team that's going to rely more on the run game and your pass game is a complement? Not every coach can do that. I like Shannon Dawson. I think he's capable of doing that. But we're going to find that out. And then, of course, the biggest if of all is Carson Beck healthy?
Mm-hmm.
That, like, I've always felt Carson Beck's overrated for someone like number 1 draft pick. He's never been that. But he's not a bum. He's a good football player. There's no doubt. It's just he's not an elevator. And when you look at him at Georgia, it was you were part of a great system. You had great players around you. In 2023, you had Brock Bowers, you had Ladd McConkey, you had talent around you, had backs, you had an offensive line. 24, talent around him is not as good. And Georgia not only loses 2 games, but they had some scares against some pretty mediocre teams during the season as well. That's why I think it's so important also to get that ground game going, because as we saw as Notre Dame fans, when your quarterback, I don't care how good he was before, when he misses the entire offseason because of an injury, it's going to take time for him to really get on the same page with the guys around him.
Oh, absolutely. And another thing that's unsettling for me about Carson Beck is the digression from 23 to 24. I put a lot of weight on quarterback experience in big games, but for you to become less efficient, more turnover prone in your second year as a starter. Look, people could say what they want about Cade Klubnik, but from 23 to 24, he improved as a quarterback. But with Carson Beck, it wasn't that. And that's what makes me nervous about him.
Yeah.
That's what makes me nervous about him.
So when you look at the Miami offense, Trevor, we talked about that. It's a big test for Shannon Dawson to kind of get that unit going. The strengths of the team, I think we can point to these. I think these are pretty obvious. The strength of the Miami offense is their offensive line.
Yeah.
We talked about in our all-opponent show, we both have Francis Malinois as our first-team offensive line, right tackle. I think he's arguably the best right tackle in college football next year. This year, Tristan Bell steps in the left tackle. He was kind of in and out of the lineup last year with also Jalen Rivers. Both of them were a little banged up last season. You get James Brockermeyer in from TCU, which I think is a very underrated pickup. We talked about it again, also him on the all-opponent team. Is he's not an elite talent. He's not a guy like a Francis Malinois who's going to be a first-round draft pick, but he's a very veteran player. He's been around the block a lot. He's got leadership traits. He's someone that can be a stabilizing force for a team that needs a stabilizing force with that offensive line. And you lost Zach Carpenter, who's a good player. Nes Cooper's a big kid with some talent. He's got to get a lot better than he was last year, but there's tools there. He's a 6'5", 6'6" kid. He's 350. He's going to have to get a little bit better conditioning, in my opinion. But if he can figure out a way to get that interior kind of comfortable and playing together, then this offensive line should be pretty good. And I think they're very good at running back. They lost Damian Martinez, but Mark Fletcher's a very good back. Jordan Lyles had a good freshman year. You get Jamar Brown in, that's without question the strength of this offense. It's in the trenches and at running back. And that's what Miami's going to have to build around this year at the beginning of the team. Biggest question marks for Miami, obviously, receiver. There's a lot of talent there, but it's a lot of unproven talent. That we agree on that. You've got JoJo Trader, who caught a touchdown pass in the bowl game. He's a rising sophomore, former top recruit. You got Ray Joseph, who had a very good spring game. He's been okay at Miami so far. The thing with Ray Joseph, what you have to ask yourself is, okay, is he maybe better than he was a highly ranked recruit that hasn't done a whole lot, but he's also been sitting behind Xavier Restrepo the last couple of years as well. Is he ready to take on a big role? He had a very good spring game performance in the spring. And JoJo had, obviously, we talked about last year, Malachi Toney's a true freshman, had over 100 yards in the spring game. He's a talented player. And then you also get Nikar back, who I was very high on coming out of high school, and then CJ Daniels. There's some talent there, but as we talked about, Trev, it's very unproven. How's it fit together? And this unit has had very little time with Carson Beck. And as we saw with Notre Dame last year, it took Notre Dame a good 5-6 games to even remotely get their offense on the same page from a pass game standpoint, because they had what? Young players that needed to step up, Jaden Greathouse, Jordan Faison, and then a bunch of new transfers that hadn't played with Riley Leonard before, and he'd been out until the summer. Same thing with Carson Beck. And that's what Miami's going to have to work through at not just wide receiver, but also tight end, because they lost their top couple tight ends last year as well. And then the final question mark is, it's not whether or not Carson Beck is a good player or not. We could debate how good of a player, but he's a good player. It's the health, how healthy he's going to be. It was a bad injury. It was late in the year. Sometimes with injuries, it's timing. Because of how late it was, he had to miss all spring. He's now getting back. How quickly can he get caught up to speed physically, but then also with the team? Those are going to be the big questions that Miami's going to have to answer. And how well they answer them is going to determine if this offense can remain good enough for them to compete for an ACC championship.
Totally. With the strength of their team being the offensive line and the running back room, I think it puts less emphasis on how good the receivers have to be. I'm not saying that they have to go be Xavier Restrepo and Isaiah Horton. I don't want to get that confused either. They don't have to repeat that production and still be good on the ground, right? So for me, we watched Notre Dame do it last year. You can get through games. Notre Dame didn't throw a passing touchdown until their 4th regular season game, and they ended up playing for the national championship. So if you can lean into that, then Miami's going to be in a good spot. But you do have to have your receivers contribute at some point. And when that's going to be, it's why you need to lean on your run game to get you there at some point.
That's right. So that's the Miami offense, Trev. We're going to talk about the Miami defense next, but I think the final piece is that is having some continuity from a coaching standpoint will be important for this unit. Shannon Dawson comes back. You've got someone who's considered one of the better O-line coaches in the country. I think that's something that helps as well. At least on that side of the ball, there wasn't any major turnover. The important pieces came back. Your OC's back. Your O-line coach is back. I think that's important as well. Trevor, let's talk about the Miami defense, because this is a unit that you want to talk about ifs. This is the biggest if on their football team. I actually think their offense is still going to be pretty good. The question is, how good? Is it going to be anywhere close to what it was last year? But will it be good enough with what the issues were on defense? So I think Miami is going to be better on defense. The question is how much. I don't think Miami's going to be as good on offense. The question is how much. And what you need to make sure of is that any regression you have on offense from a scoring, yards, whatever standpoint is not as much as is less than what your improvement is on defense.
Sure.
This is the side of the ball that is going to ultimately determine just how good Miami is going to be this season. Obviously, defensively, they made some changes from last season. They got rid of Lance Guidry. They hired Corey Heatherman And we're going to pull up some numbers here from the Miami defense, Trev, and it's going to show that Miami's a team that in some ways needs a lot of work. Their scoring average last year their yards per game ranked 27th. Their rushing yards ranked 19th. Those numbers are a little bit misleading, and we'll dive into that to show that why. But they did rank last season 68th in scoring, and when you break down Miami's results last year, they were they looked to be pretty good on defense early. So when you look at the numbers and you say, okay, well, they gave up only 25.3 points per game. Well, they only gave up 41 total points in the first 4 games, period. So when you look at Miami's results for the season, yes, they gave up 25.3 points per game. But if you actually look at it, after the first 4 games, it was pretty bad. They gave up 32 points per game in their last 9 games. They gave up over 30 to Virginia Tech, Cal, Louisville, Duke, Syracuse, and Iowa State. And then also gave up 28 points in a loss to Georgia Tech. Their defense is going to have to get a lot better, and it's in ways that I think go beyond the statistics because, again, I think Miami had some performances last year where they looked really good against some inferior opponents. Their numbers on the whole were not that great. They held Florida A&M, for example, to 190 yards. They were pretty terrible on offense. They held Ball State to 115 yards last season, and they held Wake Forest, who wasn't very good last year, to 193 yards. Outside of those 3 games, they gave up 375.5 yards per game. That's a 50-point jump based on the numbers right there if you just take out those 3 games. Now, you could talk to a lot of teams. If they take out their top 3 games, they're not going to be as good. But when it has that big of a jump, it shows you that your stats were padded by beating some relatively inferior opponents.
100%.
And they're going to need to get a lot better this season. I mean, if you look at it, from the Virginia Tech game on, you go up 6 yards a play, 7.6 yards a play to Cal, 6.2 to Louisville. You shut down a Florida State offense that was terrible, and a Wake Forest offense that was terrible. You go up 6 yards a play to Duke. You gave up 5.8 to Georgia Tech, 6.8 to Syracuse, 6.2 to Iowa State. Those are bad numbers. Bad numbers, Trev. And this is the side of the ball that's going to have to get better. And if Miami's going to improve. Now, the good news is you hired a coach in Corey Heatherman who had success last season coordinating a pretty good defense. Minnesota last season ranked 3rd in the Big Ten in total defense. They only gave up 285.7 yards per game. They were 4th in the league at 4.8 yards per play. They also ranked 4th in the Big Ten at only giving up 16.9 points per game. So they went out and got a young coordinator that had success kind of quickly rebuilding that Minnesota defense. They're going to need him to get this thing rolling immediately at Miami. The good news is he walks into a situation where there's some pretty good talent up front, which should help him. But Miami is going to have to get a lot better at a lot of things, tackling, not cover. Their pass defense last season was bizarre. There were times they looked pretty good, and times you're like, how are you giving up those kind of blown coverages? They were a very odd team last year, and if they're going to make a run this year, they're going to have to make major improvements on the defensive side of the ball after losing their entire secondary. Your best linebacker, Francisco Mauanoa. You lost Tyler Barron on your defensive line, who had 11 tackles for loss last season, and you lost Simeon Barrow from your team last. So they had some losses on both sides of the ball. They have talent coming back, but they're going to have to get a lot better on defense and in a hurry.
Yeah, this is the side of the ball that kind of holds Miami's season in balance. And you go and you look, and it's just you look at the overall makeup of the team. The offense is going to take a step back statistically. I'm not saying they're going to be bad, but they're not going to score 43.9 points per game. I would be shocked if they were able to maintain that. They're not going to have the number 3 passing offense in the country, and in certain moments, they're not going to have Cam Ward to bail them out of some of those close game scenarios. So they need the defensive side of the ball to step up. It cannot be the same as what it was. There has to be some improvement, and I do think it will be improved. partially because I don't know in certain games how much worse it could get. I mean, your offense against Louisville scored 52 points and you won by a touchdown.
Right.
It was a good Louisville offense, don't get me wrong.
Right.
But that game, there might as well not have even been a defense on the field for either team. But defensively, they need to step it up. I do like the Corey Heatherman hire. If there's one thing that PJ Fleck and them had going for him at Minnesota, they did have good defenses year in and year out for the most part. So I do like that hire. I like what their front four is made up of. A lot of questions in the secondary. I know we'll touch on that. But, yeah, defensive line, if their front four can get home, it's going to be they're going to be a better defense for sure.
Schematically, the thing about Corey Heatherman that I think makes sense for that hire is he's like very different than Al Golden, for example. He is a lineup, get in your set, be sound, be physical, be gap conscious, fly to the football. It's not we're going to blitz from all over the place. We're going to, have a million different coverages and a million different pressures. And we're going to run all these line games because that's what killed Miami last year. Is they were complicated for no reason whatsoever. And that's what would result in just some of the absolute blown coverages and terrible gap fits and things like that. With Corey Heatherman saying, listen, we're Miami. We got talent. We don't need to design a million different pressures to try to – no, we got a great D-line. Let them attack. We have talented linebackers. Let them run to the football. We have long athletic secondary players. Stop asking them to do all the million. Just let them go play football. I'm being a little bit hyperbolic in the simplicity of what he's doing. I'm doing so to make a point that his whole thing is it's not about how smart I am. It's about what my players can do. Since I have players, we're going to line up. We're going to be smart. We're not going to get out leveraged. We're not going to have a bunch of bad run fits. We're going to tackle well. We're going to fly to the football. Like that's what Miami's going to try to do now, at least based on what he did at Minnesota. And I think that's what you need at a place like Miami. You don't have to scheme your way into success when you have the talent that Miami is going to have. Now, on a national scale, to win a national championship, I do think their talent needs to get better on defense. There's no question, especially on the back end. But it's good enough talent to compete for an ACC championship and maybe win a game or two in the postseason if they can get everybody on the same page. And that's the biggest if of all. I have far fewer ifs on offense with the receivers by the time we get to the middle of the season. I think they'll be fine because that's if you're talented enough and you have good coaching, receivers eventually figure it out. And we saw that even with Notre Dame last year. In the playoffs, who was Notre Dame's two most effective receivers? It was Jordan Faison and Jaden Greathouse, two sophomores. Like they'll be okay eventually if they can protect that group enough. Secondary is a little bit of a different animal. Because it's not I don't know that the talent is as good as it is on the offensive side of the ball. And can they cover against some of the better teams? But their talent is still significantly better than a lot of the teams are going to play next year. It's just about getting everybody on the same page. And I feel like his scheme and his emphasis is well suited for bringing in a bunch of new guys that have to figure it out. Because not only are they going to have a brand new secondary, but their linebacking core is going to look a little bit different this year as well, Trev, because you lost Francisco Mauanoa. You do have I always get his name right. Basanthi. I have no clue how to pronounce his name. He comes back. He was a good linebacker last year. You got Muhammad Traore transferring from Rutgers, who in 23 before his knee injury was a really good football player. Raul Aguirre is a kid that I had ranked as a top 100 caliber recruit coming out of high school. There's talent there, but now they're not going to ask them to do as much as they did last year. They're going to put more trust in the D-line than they did last year. And I think that's what's going to help Miami have a chance to improve on defense, is let the D-line work. Don't put as much on them. Let the players in the back end keep things in front of them and run to the football. I think if they do that, they're going to be improved on defense. How much? That remains to be seen, but they're going to at least be better. And that's what I think Corey Heatherman was brought in to do on defense.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially when you have this mixed bag of transfers and younger players that are coming up in the ranks, simplicity is going to be what's needed. And I'm always a big fan of simplicity, especially when you're going through some sort of coaching change. Because you have your coordinators like a Jim Knowles, like an Al Golden, that it takes a couple seasons for it to really start to click. But one of the benefits of that we've heard about Chris Ash is that, hey, this is a very simple form of you kind of take one thing at a time instead of, hey, here's everything. And it's more like baptism under fire type deal. It's like, hey, we're going to knock out one thing at a time. Sounds like that's a lot of what Corey Heatherman wants to do. That'll ease the burden of having a lot of transfers coming into your defense. But it's going to be interesting to see how it all comes together. That's for sure.
What I'm interested in is how good is Miami's run defense going to be? They were the weirdest team in college football last year when you watch what their film looked like with their run defense compared to their numbers. Because you look at their numbers, they were a pretty good run defense last year, Trev. I mean, they gave up 112 yards per game. They gave up 3.8 yards per carry. Like, okay, like, isn't that good? My concern, though, is when you look at who they played. They feasted on a pretty bad schedule of rushing teams. And when they played teams that were pretty good at running the football, they did not do as well. Georgia Tech being an obvious example last season. Virginia Tech being another one.
It's also the flow of the game, too. I mean, Miami's offense, the way that they were such a high-powered offense, it could get a jump on teams that not a lot of teams could afford to just kind of establish a ground game once you immediately go down by 14 points.
Right.
You know, that also plays a factor in it as well. Like, I'd be curious to see what some of the rushing attempt numbers were for some of these teams, you know, in some of these bigger shootout games that are like, okay, yes, on paper, Miami held Louisville to 88 yards rushing. It's like, well, that's because each quarterback had like 600 passing yards or whatever it was. So I'd be interested to see what those numbers were too. But I agree. Miami's rush defense last year was interesting.
Yeah. Hold on a second. So looking at it, Trev, when we look at the strengths of the Miami defense and how they're going to improve, the big question mark is going to be they have to get a lot better in secondary or in pass defense. That's the one area we know they struggled last year, and they're going to have to do so with a brand new secondary. Let's talk a little bit about that secondary because I know you've looked at it a lot. You've done transfer articles. Let's talk a little bit about that secondary and the players that they are bringing in.
Yeah, I mean, their secondary from a season ago, like I said, they lost 4 players that all played over 150 snaps. They lost safety Isaiah Thomas, cornerback Deani Hill. They lost safety Jaden Harris, and they also lost safety Zaquan Patterson. Now, to help combat that, they brought in some transfer players. One of them, unfortunately, left in the spring portal after coming in the winter portal. That's a different conversation for a different day. Hate that any player has the ability to do that, but that was Emmanuel Carnleaf, a cornerback from Arizona, came in the winter, transferred out again in the spring. But they brought in Charles Brantley, a cornerback from Michigan State, who I like. They brought in Xavier Lucas from Wisconsin. We talked about him before. He's one of those players that, like, you know, he's weird because he has good traits, but doesn't jump off the page at you like, yo, this is going to be a dude. They also brought in Jacoby Thomas, a safety from Tennessee. So a lot of what their projected depth chart is going to be some transfers. I know OJ Frederick Jr. comes back, I think, in their secondary. As of right now, our lads has them slated to start, but Ethan O'Connor, a redshirt sophomore transfer, is slated to kind of battle him out for that other cornerback position.
I like O'Connor, by the way. He's a real tall, long kid. He's a good football player.
But outside of that, there are 4 other starters in the secondary, and they're also including nickelbacks as starters here. Jacoby Thomas, that transfer starting. Zechariah Poyser is starting, and then Xavier Lucas is also slated to start with Charles Brantley starting in the nickel. So you're going to have a completely new look secondary down in South Beach. So biggest thing is for Corey Heatherman is going to be shoring up the back end of that defense. Especially when you have a bunch of new guys. Now, enter the simplicity of what his scheme is. Ideally, that's going to help get them kind of all together. Right. And then behind them, you have people who were on the team last year. You have Dylan Day, Markeith Williams, Damari Brown, Jadis Richards. So we'll see what their depth starts to look like. But at the top, it's all going to be made up of transfers.
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see how they can get those guys going, Trev. And I just real quick while you're doing that, I did a little bit of research. So last year Miami played 3 teams that ranked in the top 40 in rushing: for Cal, Georgia Tech, and Louisville. The rest of their schedule ranked 66, 63rd, 67th, 68th, 69th, 70th, 80th, 81st, 100th, 107th, and 110th in rushing offense last year. So that factored into their numbers and the lack of – Virginia Tech, who ranked they were the 4th best team on the schedule. They ran for 206, 6.4 per carry. Louisville only ran for 106 yards, but they averaged 5.1 per carry and ran it 21 times because they were down. Miami was on them. That leads to your point about how they used them. And then they did a good job against Cal. They held Cal to only 73 yards. So that was the one performance they did. And then Georgia Tech also ran for 271 against them. Iowa State ranked 110th in rushing last year and ran for 145 yards and 4.7 in that game. So they're going to have to be Florida State ranked 107th in rushing. They gave up 133 and 4.8 in that game. So they're going to have to get better in that regard. But I think that's where allowing the defensive line to be more aggressive in attack is going to, I think, benefit them, which allows their linebackers to kind of run. They were bringing pressures for no reason last year. It's like, I think like Mario Cristobal made Lance Guidry to be the scapegoat for last season and publicly did so, which is a bad look. It's like, you're right. We all know that. You don't have to go out there and throw him under the bus that way. Yeah. We all know that. We watched the games. We know that your defensive coaching was bad. You hired him and you allowed him to come back for a second year. Like, you don't need to. You're the head coach. It stops with you, and that's one of the things I don't like about Mario Cristobal is he'll blame other people for things. Like, dude, you're the head football coach. This is ultimately on you. But he did make the change and brought in Corey Heatherman. And the key is he recognized the change. He brought in it's one thing to fire a coach. That's easy to do. We all knew that Brian Van Gorder needed to go at Notre Dame. Everybody knew Lance Guidry had to go at Miami. The question is, do you recognize why that guy was unsuccessful and then make a change to bring in someone that better fits that? And that's what I think he did with the Corey Heatherman hire.
Sure.
Corey Heatherman is a polar opposite of Lance Guidry schematically and how he runs a defense. Polar opposite. And I think that was a smart hire. I don't like how he went about it, but I think it was a smart move. Looking at the strengths of Miami, there's no question that the defensive line, Trevor, is the strength of this defense. I don't think that's any doubt. D-tackle and D-end are both strong. They've got depth at both positions. They're not just, Bain and I know you had talked earlier when we were doing our all-opponent team as Messidor. Akeem Messidor is a kid to keep an eye on, but it's not just those two. There's good depth there. Marquise Lightfoot was a highly ranked recruit. We'll see what he can do. Armando Blunt, Malik Bryant are players that have some good depth players. There is a drop-off between the starters and the number twos at defensive end, but the number twos are still good, solid rotation players. Defensive tackle, I think the number 2 depth is actually better. You've got Justin Scott and Ahmed Moten as starters. David Blay is a kid they brought in from Louisiana Tech. I think that's a stronger 3-man rotation where I could see any of those 3 guys being starters for them. They brought in Dante Simpson, who is a bigger kid that is a well-regarded recruit coming in. So I think that's going to be a good part. And I think if Muhammad Traore is healthy and can get caught up in the system, because I am concerned about how late he picked them, if he can be healthy, then they've got a nice rotation at linebacker as well. You've got the returning starter from last year. You add Traore and the success that he had. As I said, I like Raul Aguirre. I think he's a guy, he played a little bit last year, 171 snaps, performed well when he was in there. I think they've got a nice rotation if Muhammad Traore is who they had. So their front 7 has a chance to be really good this season. And ultimately, when Miami was great, they always had great secondaries, but at the end of the day, they were elite because they could dominate in the box. And this team has a chance to be that. They've got to prove it and be more consistent, play with more consistent effort, execute better. If they can do that, then I think that's where this defense makes improvements this season. And then we're back to the question is how much. But I think Miami could. This is where I think you and I disagree, because I tend to look at the projection. You're more of the show me guy, which is totally fair. But if you just look at it from a pure projection standpoint, there is the talent in the front seven to take a lot of that pressure off of the back four or back five when they're in their nickel stuff. They're going to need that because a great pass rush and shutting down the run, putting them teams in more pass-heavy situations is how you can protect a secondary that's trying to figure things out. Now, Corey Heatherman's going to have to make sure that they're not going too far with some of their coverage structures early so they don't have the mistakes, the coverage mistakes that we saw last season.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I'm high on Miami's defensive line. I think they had a player in my first, second, and third team on defense for Notre Dame's all-opponent team. So D-line is definitely the strength. It's all going to have to come together, just like it is with any other team. I get real nervous, no matter what group it is, whether it's easy to make the transition or more difficult to make the transition. When you're solely made up of portal kids, it always will make me nervous, no matter the school, no matter the position group. And so if, again, it's able to come together, then we'll see.
But that's why that front seven is so important.
Absolutely.
Because if you're forcing your secondary to play like Notre Dame secondary, you're going to be in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
If the secondary can be more sit in front, let things happen because we're going to be jumping throws because our pass rush is getting there, then that's when they have more success. But if they're sitting there where the quarterback can get into his full drop, right out his play action, make his read, get to his secondary throws, they're going to be in trouble. Because I like the secondary talent. I don't love it. It's not it's not vintage Miami. And that's the one area from a high school recruiting standpoint, Mario Cristobal is going to have to make the biggest improvement is you're going to have to recruit better talent on the back end out of high school. Have to. That's a big key for him in his program because those are the questions. I mean, linebacker's a question mark in the standpoint of there's a lot of guys, the new player, and guys got to step up. Cornerback and safety, though, how quickly that group can figure it out at all, or if they can at all, is ultimately going to determine whether the defense gets any better or not. Because to your point, Trev, if the secondary is a mess, I don't care how good your front seven is, when you're playing better teams, you're going to get exposed. That's just that's true for everybody. And that's where they're going to have to improve. And we've seen that. We've seen that in the postseason. We've seen secondaries that were good in the regular season because the front seven was so good, and you play some really good offensive line or some really well-coached team that can scheme to protect the quarterback, and all of a sudden you're getting tore up. And we saw that in the postseason multiple times last year. We saw that happen to Oregon secondary. They couldn't get to the quarterback, and their secondary got torched.
Yeah.
You know, we saw that with Tennessee secondary, which that had been a great defense all season, but they couldn't get to the quarterback, and Will Howard destroyed them.
Yeah.
And blown coverages, and I mean all types of stuff, because now you've got to now bring pressure, do more things you haven't been doing all year, and that's when you make mistakes. It's going to be interesting. Very interesting. So, Trev, those are kind of that's an overview of Miami. You know, it's a team that's a very intriguing team, very unique. There's people that have them top 10. There's people that have them outside the top 25. Not just you, but you're not alone in that regard. It's a team that's got a very wide gap between what they are and what they could be.
Yeah.
And that's why I say this is going to show how good of a coach Mario Cristobal is going to be. Because I think you would say, especially since you're more of a skeptic of Miami, if they're 10-2 going into the postseason, that I would assume, correct me if I'm wrong, that means you think Mario Cristobal did a pretty good job coaching this team up. If they're 10 into the year against the schedule they play.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll look back and say, look, that defensive line hire, or the defensive coordinator hire panned out well. The receivers did enough. Like the receivers were what Notre Dame's receivers were last year. Stepped up in the moments that they need to, but they were a run-heavy team. That's a good coaching job by Mario Cristobal. A really good job to get that team there, for sure.
If you're 10-2 against a schedule where you got to play Notre Dame, Florida, Louisville, Syracuse, and NC State at home, and then you've got to play at Florida State, at SMU, at Virginia Tech, and at Pitt. If you're 10-2 against that schedule, you did a pretty darn good coaching job, in my opinion.
No doubt.
And I think that's the expectation, is your town is good enough. Like, I'm sorry, you should not be getting out-talented by SMU. You should not be getting out-talented by Louisville or Virginia Tech or Pitt. It's one thing to get out-talented by Notre Dame. That happens to a lot of people. It's another thing to get, out-talented even by Florida State to a degree, or just outplayed by Florida State if, let's say, they're better. Or a team like Florida, for example. But some of those tougher late season games, you're still Miami. You're still in year 4 at Miami. You need to be able to say, our dudes are still better than your dudes. The problem with Miami last year is there were games with their dudes better than the other team's dudes, but the dudes with the headsets on the other side were way better than the dudes on the headsets on the Miami side. And that's where I think that Corey Heatherman hire could be impactful. Is if you're the coach that Miami fans hope you are, this is a season where 10-2 should be the floor of what your team is. I'm not saying that's what the floor of what they'll be, but this roster should still, just pure talent, is still better than probably at least 8 teams on their schedule, if not more.
Mm-hmm.
But now you got to coach them up and put them in position to be successful. So, Trev, we'll have more of a Miami prediction when we do our ACC preview. What, though, is your floor and what is your ceiling for Miami in 2025?
Are we talking record or how far they'll go? Or yes?
Both. Yeah, like floor. And then, so like if your record is this, where do you see their postseason going? It doesn't have to be, I see them in the quarterfinals. Just, are they are they in the ACC title game? Are they in the playoff? That kind of thing. So, and then record driving that.
Yeah, I think the floor of this team, I would say, is 9-3 competing for the ACC championship. We saw last year a 3-loss ACC team play for the conference championship. I think that's well within reach of what Miami's capable to do. The back half of their schedule is rough. Once they leave the state of Florida, you don't have a lot of easy games in there to get through. Not over the top tough games, but similar to Notre Dame's schedule, right? Where it's like just week in and week out in the tail end of your schedule, you're just playing good quality football teams. And that's kind of when Miami has shown that they've struggled before in the past. Like, how do you drop that game to Syracuse? How did you drop that game to a Georgia Tech? Both of those teams last year, they weren't over the top juggernauts, but they were good quality football teams. Can Mario Cristobal keep his team focused for 12 regular season games? We'll see. But I do think that would be the floor, but I do think 9-3 puts them in contention for an ACC championship, like to play for the ACC.
There's a possibility that a 9-3 Miami team has only got one conference loss.
Yeah.
I actually think that they'll split Notre Dame and Miami, or Florida. I mean, I don't think they'll lose both. Like, obviously, I think they're going to lose to Notre Dame. I think they still got a shot to beat Florida at home. I think that's a game they can win.
Yeah.
And then now you're getting to where if they have 3 losses, there's 2 conference losses, which still, as you said, puts them in position to still play for the ACC championship. Clemson lost, last year had 1 conference loss, and then SMU didn't have any. So they at least have a shot there. But the floor for me for Miami is I could see them. I think you have said this before, and I could see this team, or I know some people in our chat during our Bisa Holds have mentioned this. I could see this team really struggling and falling apart a little bit because you have so many portal guys that if you have a couple bad losses early, there's a checkout aspect to it. We've seen that with portal teams. We saw that with Florida State last year. No, they weren't good, but there was a lot of checking out being done by guys that had only been there for a year or 2. So you got to get one of those big early season wins. Otherwise, you're talking about a team that, let's say they lose to Notre Dame, and then let's say they lose to one of Florida State, Louisville, or Florida. And now all of a sudden you're sitting here at 4-2, and you've still got to play at SMU, at Virginia Tech, at Pitt. Now, all of a sudden, it's like, where's your psyche at? Or heaven forbid, they lose 3 of those games. So it's like those are things that you look at and say, that's why those early season wins are so important. That's why beating Florida is important. That's why beating Florida State in Tallahassee is important. Because if this Miami team can build some confidence, that makes them much more capable of having what they need mentally to go down to Dallas and Fort Worth area and beat SMU. To beat Louisville again at home this year, to go up into the cold, because now all of a sudden you're talking, is this a mentally tough enough team that they go up to in the mountains of Virginia in November? Can they go in the mountains of Pennsylvania in November when it's cold and maybe snowy and have the mental toughness to say, hey, we're going to go out there and we've got something to play for. We're going to finish this thing strong. I think the early season success is what they need. They need to have one of those big wins. Florida State, they've got to win those games. If they can get rolling, then this Miami team becomes hard to stop. And then they are what you're talking about, a potential 10-2, 11-1 team that's playing for the ACC title. And if they're doing that, then I do think they have enough talent to beat Clemson, because they're the one team in the SEC, in the ACC, that in a ACC title matchup against Clemson can say, we're not afraid of you in the trenches.
Yeah.
There aren't many that can do that. Miami can, if they answer some of those questions. They can say, you're not going to out-athlete us. You're not going to beat us up in the trenches. We can go toe-to-toe with you in the trenches. And that's what I think gives Miami a chance, if they can answer those questions of winning the ACC this year, or at least playing with Clemson. But that's a lot of ifs. They got to prove that. And that's what makes them so unique. They have the biggest floor versus ceiling gap to me of all the top teams in the ACC. Like, Louisville's not going to go 6-6 this year. They're better coached than that. Miami could. Miami could also win the ACC. And anyone outside of just a pure Miami homer knows exactly why there's that variance.
Yep.
I lean more towards, I think they answer some of those questions. I do. But now we'll see. But I think that's a big floor versus gap. Like A&M, not nearly as big of a floor versus ceiling gap to me.
No, out of all of my teams, the two teams that I think have the most variance in their season is Miami and LSU for me in my rankings that I have.
Your top 25 you're talking about?
Yep. Miami is.
Explain that.
Meaning
difference for you.
Yeah. So in different lights, I have LSU ranked. I view LSU like how Bryan is viewing Miami. I think a lot of those questions get answered. And I've said this all along, Brian Kelly will just have that random season. Could this be the one? Timeline-wise, it's lining up for when he did it at Notre Dame. It's lining up for when he did it at Cincinnati. Maybe. But it would not at all shock me if they're out of the top 15 and out of playoff contention talk come November. Wouldn't surprise me either, because of his track record at LSU. On the flip side, I don't have Miami ranked in my preseason top 25. This is a team that I don't know if you've caught the drift the last hour and 15 minutes. I'm not high on this team, truly. But I'm also not oblivious to the fact that I could be very well absolutely wrong because of the things that we talked about today. And so I'm saying that those two teams for me have the most room for variance. Whereas I think I don't think I ranked Michigan. What's a team that I had ranked? Okay. Another team that I had ranked somewhere in there is like Iowa State. I think I had ranked it like 24th. I don't think Iowa State's going to win the Big 12. I also don't see them going like 5-7. They're going to be somewhere in like the 7-5 to 9-3 range, and it's not much of that. But Miami, would it at all shock me if they went 10-2, 11-1 and won the ACC? No. Would it shock me if they went 6-6? No. And so that's what I mean by, in my top 25 rankings, they're the team with the most variance that I have out of all of the top 25.
So, end of the day, if you had to make a prediction today, what's your prediction for Miami?
I think as of today, I think Miami's going to go 8-4 and miss out, or 8-4 to, I think they're going to go 8-4. Sorry, because I had to count for out of conference stuff. I think they're going to go 8-4, but still have a shot to play for the ACC title.
I have them at 9-3 in the same boat. I think they head into that Virginia Tech Pitt thing at the end of the year with a chance to, if they went out and one team loses, they've got a shot to get into the ACC championship game. That's where it's at. I think beating Notre Dame would be huge for them, confidence booster wise. But I honestly think just being in a 4-quarter game against Notre Dame is something that staff could use and say, hey, listen, we went toe-to-toe with the national runners-up, preseason top 5 team, and we're just getting started.
Yeah.
I think that has to be like a competitive, close football game for them. If they do that, I think that helps them then go have confidence to say, we can beat Florida.
Yeah.
Again, they just need to make sure they don't overlook Florida because of how bad they beat them last year. This is a much better Florida team than the one they played the first game of the year last year. That's going to be important for them. Very important.
For sure.
We did have a super chat that I want to get to here before we get out of here, Trev. My guy, Devon Bailey, says Adon Schuler is really going to have a breakout season this year. Mark my words. Devon, I'm going to tell you right now, first of all, appreciate the super chat. Second of all, these cats are not dudes that you need to convince that Adon Schuler is going to have a breakout year.
No.
I think you're absolutely spot on it. And there's 2 reasons why. One is obviously Adon had a pretty darn good redshirt freshman year, first year as a starter. And number two, I'm a big believer in guys that have seen it being done at a high level and before them. We talk about how important that's been at Notre Dame in the offensive line, how important it was for Ronnie Stanley to spend a year on the same team, 2 years on the same team with actually it was 1 year. He was a freshman at 13, but to have that year of playing with Zach Martin and Chris Watt. And then the importance of Quentin Nelson to be able to be on a team that had a Ronnie Stanley. And then you go down the line, how important it was for Liam Eichenberg to be on a team for 2 years with Quentin Nelson and Mike McGlinchey, and how that legacy builds. Well, in the case of Adon Schuler, getting to play next to Xavier Watts all year was huge for him. Being in the room and seeing how Xavier Watts prepares and studies and goes about his business for 2 years is going to be huge for Adon. And I think benefited him last year a great deal on top of his own ability. You and I have said before, and I'm okay putting this on the record, I think Adon Schuler is going to be a captain this year.
Yes.
I'll be surprised if he isn't, to be completely honest with you. So that's what we think of him, not just from a production standpoint, but from a leadership standpoint.
Yeah, we absolutely see that the same. Absolutely.
Trev, great show today, man. I enjoyed that. You did an excellent job today. Why don't you go and take us out of here?
You got it. Well, hey, listen, show schedule for tomorrow is actually going to be interesting. Irish Invasion is tomorrow, Brian. So will we be back tomorrow at some point?
Probably not.
Okay.
We're going to try to do something over the weekend, but me, you, and Sean Davis are all going to be at Irish Invasion tomorrow. So we won't be doing our normal show at 1 o'clock.
Good deal. Well, listen, whenever we do go live, if we go live this weekend, that is why it is always important to be subscribed to this channel and that notification bell hit so you know whenever we go live. Before you head out of here today, please be sure to hit that like button. Whatever streaming platform you watch this on, please be sure to leave us a 5-star review. We would greatly appreciate it. I believe IB Nation Sports Talk is going live tonight at 5 p.m. But as always, the best way to support what we do here is subscribe to the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Also, game 1 of the NBA Finals is on tonight. I live in Indianapolis. It's an awesome time to be down here right now. Go, Sirs. Let's hope they get it done. But until the next time, that's Brian. I'm Trevor. We'll see you back here very soon on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.